There is a moment in the very first episode of Gravity Falls where a 12-year-old boy reaches into a hollow tree and pulls out a leather-bound book with a 6-fingered hand stamped on the cover. And the show does not quite tell you yet how much that book is going to matter, but everything that follows, every monster, every codex, every quiet ache, hiding under the bright cartoon color, is already waiting between its pages. This is Pine Hat, and tonight we are going through all of it. The whole story of Gravity Falls, from a golf cart on a forest road in the summer of 2012 to the very last cipher in the credits in 2016, and the theories that fans have been turning over in their hands ever since. So get comfortable, turn the lights down if you have not already, and if you have not subscribed, it genuinely helps us keep making these videos. Let us begin where the show begins, in the woods. The town of Gravity Falls, Oregon is the first character you really meet. Before the twins, before the man in the fez, before any of the creatures the show is going to introduce you to. It is a small mountain town in the Pacific Northwest, the kind of place where the trees are so tall they swallow the sky and the road signs feel a half-decade out of date, and the show frames it from the start as a place where something is wrong, but not loudly wrong, never loudly wrong. The wrongness is in the corners. A vending machine in the back of a tourist trap has hinges on the side instead of just the front. A statue in the woods has 6 fingers. A car in the diner parking lot has a license plate that, if you pause and decode it, spells out a message the characters cannot hear. Gravity Falls is a town built on layered information, and the show teaches you very early that anything you see clearly is probably only the surface of something else. The trees are too still. The mist sits too low. The townspeople, who at first feel like comic relief, eventually start to read like survivors. They have all been here too long. They have all seen too much. And many of them, you will eventually realize, do not remember the things they have seen. Because the show is also a story about memory, about who is allowed to keep it and who has had it taken away. The town texture, the way the wallpaper in the Mystery Shack has eyes that follow you, the way the gas station signs flicker between English and something older, the way the dusk lasts a little longer than it should. All of it is the show whispering that this is not just a quirky cartoon vacation spot. This is a place that has been carefully arranged by someone, and the rules here are different from the rules anywhere else. Holding that idea in your head, that Gravity Falls is a town that has been arranged, makes almost every joke in the series feel a little stranger on a rewatch. The early episodes work as Monster of the Week comedies precisely because the show is hiding everything else, but even in those first episodes, the camera lingers a beat too long on certain shadows. The forest is not background. The forest is the antagonist foyer. The 2 children the show drops into this place are Dipper and Mabel Pines, 12-year-old twins from Piedmont, California, sent by their parents to spend the summer with their great-uncle in Oregon, a man they have apparently never really met before. Dipper is the cautious one, the one with the cap pulled low and the journal he does not yet have, the one who spends every episode trying to make sense of what he is seeing because making sense of things is, for him, a survival skill. Mabel is the other one. Mabel is bright as a kitchen window in July. She is bigger than the cartoon she is in, more present than anyone around her, sweater first into every disaster, and the show makes a very deliberate choice in the first episode by letting Mabel be wholly herself before you understand what that is going to cost her later. The 2 of them work, as siblings on screen, the way real siblings work, which is to say they are loving and they are annoying, and they save each other reflexively, without sentiment, the way you save someone you have lived in the same room with for 12 years. The show was created by Alex Hirsch, who has a twin sister named Ariel, and you can feel that lived knowledge in every scene the 2 of them share. Dipper does not perform brotherhood. Mabel does not perform sisterhood. The bond is just there, in the room with them, like furniture. And the show eventually puts enormous pressure on that bond, more pressure than a children's cartoon was supposed to be able to put on anything, because the central question of the series, once you can see it, is not whether the twins can defeat the demon. It is whether they can survive the end of childhood together, or whether one of them is going to have to grow up before the other. Everything you are about to hear is, underneath, a story about that. The man waiting for the twins at the bus stop in the pilot is Grunkle Stan, short for Great Uncle Stan, an old con artist in a fez and an eye patch who runs the Mystery Shack. a tourist trap full of taxidermy frauds and overpriced snow globes that he sells to gullible tourists in the woods. On the surface, he is the show-running joke. He is grouchy, he is cheap, he steals from his own customers, he forces his great-niece and nephew to work for him without pay. His relationship with the truth is best described as occasional, and the early episodes are very happy to let you laugh at him as a cartoon hustler. The show is, in some ways, daring you to take Stan for granted. Look how cheap his costumes are. Look how stupid his exhibits are. Look how often he is lying. And while it is doing all of that, the show is also, very quietly, planting tells. Stan has photographs in his desk he never looks at. Stan flinches at certain words. Stan disappears into the basement at the end of the first episode, and we are not allowed to follow. The pilot ends, before the credits even roll, with Stan opening a hidden door behind a vending machine and going down into a place the children do not know exists. That image, a man going down alone into his own house in secret, is the entire show in one frame. Stan is hiding something. The show tells you this in episode 1. It then spends 2 full seasons making you wait to find out what. And the wait is the whole point. By the time you learn what is behind the vending machine, you will have built up so much affection for the man telling lies on the surface that the truth lands like a real grief, and that is no accident. Hirsch and his team designed the slow burn deliberately, and they laid the clues so far in advance, in shots that lasted half a second, in symbols on the wallpaper, in the order of the books on Stan's shelf, that the whole first season is in retrospect a magic trick where the prestige takes the better part of a year to arrive. The inciting moment, the cold flick of the switch that turns a tourist comedy into a mystery show, happens in the first episode when Dipper is forced to put up signs in the woods around the mystery shack and discovers a strange metallic plate set into the trunk of a tree. He presses it. A panel opens. Inside the hollow of the tree is a small leather book stamped with a gold 6-fingered hand and the numeral 3. The book is handwritten in a slightly nervous, slightly grand script by someone the show simply calls the author, and it catalogs in obsessive detail every supernatural creature, anomaly, conspiracy, and danger in Gravity Falls. It has warnings. It has theories. It has annotated diagrams of things you have not yet seen. It is also, very obviously, incomplete. The author is missing. The book has been abandoned in a tree for someone, and Dipper is the someone who finds it, and from the second he opens it, he becomes a different character. He becomes the inheritor. He spends the rest of the series trying to live up to the man who wrote the book, trying to fill in its gaps, trying to find the other journals, trying to be worthy of a project he stumbled into by accident, and the journal becomes the show organizing object the way the One Ring is the organizing object of another, more famous story. Almost every plot beat in the next 40 episodes traces back to it. Whoever has the book in their hands has a kind of authority. Whoever has all 3 books, the show eventually reveals, has access to something else entirely, and that something else is what the secret door behind the vending machine has been waiting for 30 years. The first season unfolds as a parade of one-off cases. In the structure of an old American kids show, the way a procedural sets its hero a new mystery each week. There is an episode about gnomes, a small civilization of the little creatures living in the forest, who are introduced as the show's first real monster, and who turn out to be both more pathetic and more dangerous than they first appear. There is an episode about a haunted convenience store. There is one about a wax museum where the figures come alive. There is one about a ghost in a video game. There is a lake monster hunt. There is a copy machine that produces living, paper-thin, identical clones of Dipper. There is a mustachioed Manitor cult in the mountains who try to teach Dipper how to be a man and end up teaching him something more complicated. The episodes are funny. They are paced like comedy. They are also, almost without exception, doing 2 jobs at once. While they are running their Monster of the Week plot, they are also seeding pieces of the larger mystery, in passing, in a poster on the wall, in a single line of dialogue in the page of the journal that Dipper happens to flip past. The Wax Museum episode includes a wax figure of someone Stan reacts to with a private grief he does not explain. The Clones episode introduces the idea that the laws of physics in this town can be edited locally if you have the right tool. The video game episode introduces the show-running motif of fictional characters becoming real, which becomes load-bearing in the finale. The Manitor cult features a creature called the Multi-Bear who lives in a cave and quotes disco music. And although the joke is the joke, the cave is the same kind of cave the journal warns about. Watching the first season the first time, you experience it as comedy. Watching it the second time, you experience it as a slow accumulation of evidence. The show is not subtle once you know what to look for. It is just patient. Out of all the figures that orbit the twins in the first season, the one who turns the show from a string of adventures into a serialized story is Gideon Gleeful, a child psychic with a bouffant of white blonde hair, a baby blue suit, and a smile that does not reach his eyes. Gideon runs a rival attraction in town called the Tent of Telepathy, and he is, on the surface, a parody of certain real-world televangelists, a small, charming preacher of party tricks performing miracles for elderly tourists who do not look too closely. He is also, almost from his first scene, dangerously fixated on Mabel. He proposes to her, he stalks her after she refuses, he throws tantrums that bring down chandeliers, he keeps a shrine. The show does not let any of this be cute. It is one of the earlier signs that this cartoon is going to be braver about uncomfortable behavior than its time slot suggests, because Mabel discomfort is treated as real, as something the show takes seriously, even when the slapstick is happening around it. Gideon is the season's first recurring antagonist, and the reason he matters to the larger story is that he owns one of the journals. Specifically, he owns the second journal, the second of 3 that the author wrote, and the show eventually lets you understand that all 3 journals together unlock something, and that whoever has all 3 has won a game whose rules the journals themselves explain only in pieces. Gideon spends the first season trying to get Journal 3 away from Dipper. Dipper spends the first season trying not to let him. By the end of the season, Gideon has decided that the only way to get the journal is to take the mystery shack itself, because the shack is built on top of the secret door, and the secret door leads to the basement, and the basement, although Gideon does not know exactly what is in it, is where the real prize is. The Gideon arc is a beautifully clean example of how the show works. He starts as a comedy villain. He ends as a real one. He drives the season plot. He surfaces character beats. He gets defeated. And then the very last shot of the season picks him back up off the ground and quietly shows you, in passing, that he was never really the boss. The boss is somewhere else. The middle of the first season is also where the show begins, gently, to introduce its second great organizing idea, which is time. Time travel arrives in Gravity Falls in the form of Blendin Blandin, a green-skinned, slightly hapless agent from a future agency called the Time Anomaly Removal Crew, who is sent back to fix unauthorized tears in the fabric of cause and effect, and who, almost immediately, has his time travel device stolen by Mabel and Dipper for an afternoon. The episode in which this happens is a comedy. It is also the show's first quiet statement that the universe of Gravity Falls is bigger than Gravity Falls. There is a future. There are other agents. There are other timelines, and the show is going to come back to this, because Blendin does come back, more than once, and because the existence of time travel means the show can do things that ordinary children cartoons cannot do. It can show you a flashback that is not really a flashback. It can let 2 of its characters watch their own past selves. It can, in the second season, give the twins the gift of a birthday party where the entire visible plot turns out to be a contest set up by a future inhabitant of their own world to get even with a wrong they did not realize they had committed. The time travel episodes also give the show a sliding scale of how serious it is willing to be. The first one is a sweet, gentle comedy about Mabel trying to fix a single embarrassing photograph in her own past. The second one is a brutal meditation on competition and consequence. The third happens during the apocalypse. By the time the third one arrives, you will know exactly what it costs Blendin to keep showing up. And Blendin will know exactly what it costs Dipper and Mabel to be 12 years old in this town. And the show will let those 2 recognitions sit silently in the same scene without explaining either of them. This is something Gravity Falls does that almost no other animated kids show was doing at the time. It trusts you to feel a thing without telling you to feel it. The first season also contains the first real appearance of the show's primary antagonist, and an episode toward the end of the season called Dreamscaperers, which is the moment everything pivots. Up to this point, the show has been about creatures in the woods, hauntings in the town, and a smug child psychic with a vendetta. Dreamscaperers introduces Bill Cipher. Bill is a yellow triangle with one large eye and a top hat, drawn in a flat, deliberately old-fashioned style, like a piece of paper currency or an occult diagram, and he speaks in a high-pitched, jovial, broadcast-era voice provided by Hirsch himself. He is summoned by Gideon, who has been negotiating with him in dreams to find a way into Stan's mind to get to the safe combination. And what makes Bill terrifying from his very first appearance is that he is funnier than the show. He is faster than the dialogue. He treats the laws of physics, the laws of narrative, and the laws of common decency as suggestions. He turns deer teeth into stage props. He cracks jokes about people, lower spines. He calls Dipper by his real name, which the show has been guarding as a private joke for an entire season, and the reveal lands like an actual violation. Bill is the moment Gravity Falls tells you what kind of show it is going to be. He is older than the town. He is older than the author. He is, the show eventually implies, older than this universe. He has been waiting in the margins. He has been in the background of episodes the audience already watched. Go back and look. He is in stained glass. He is in the wallpaper. He is in the credits. He has been watching this whole time. Dreamscaperers ends with Bill defeated for the moment, but only because he chooses to leave. He whispers, at the threshold of the dream, that big things are coming, and the show very deliberately does not soften that line. It hangs in the air. And then, in the very next episode, the season finale called Gideon Rises, the show tightens the screws on every plot thread it has been building, takes the Mystery Shack away from Stan, almost takes the journal away from Dipper, runs Mabel through a sequence of impossible escapes, and ends with Stan, alone in his recovered basement, taking out journals 1 and 2, joining them with journal 3 he has secretly recovered, and revealing that the man behind the vending machine has had 2 of the 3 the whole time. The season ends on his face. He says nothing. He looks at the journals, he goes downstairs. And in the basement, glowing in the dark, is a machine the show has never shown you before. The second season opens not long after the first season ended, with a Halloween and summer celebration called Summerween already a memory, and the town settling into its uneasy late summer rhythm, although for the twins, the events of the finale have rearranged everything. Stan now openly has the journals. Dipper now knows Stan has the journals. The twins do not yet know what the basement is for. The very first episode of the second season, Scary Oak, raises a new layer of trouble by having Dipper accidentally raise an army of zombies during a Mystery Shack party, but more importantly, it introduces a federal presence, 2 government men in matching suits named Powers and Trigger, who are convinced that something is very wrong with this town and who suspect Stan of being at the center of it. The pair are funny. They are also the first people in the show who treat the supernatural as a real political problem, not a joke, and they bring with them a kind of pressure that the first season did not have. Authority is paying attention. Stan is being watched. And while Powers and Trigger are looking for him, Stan is in the basement, alone, doing the thing he has been doing all this time, which is calibrating a portal whose specifications he does not fully understand, on a schedule he has nearly run out of room to extend. The second season is, more than the first, a season about clocks. There is a literal countdown in the basement. There is a calendar Mabel keeps decorating in pink in the kitchen. There is the summer itself, which is going to end whether the twins are ready or not. And there is the thing in Bill voice, when he reappears, that says he too has been waiting for a moment, and that the moment is very nearly here. Early in the second season, the twins descend into a hidden underground bunker the author built decades earlier, full of dusty traps and shape-shifting creatures, and get within a few feet of finding the author's real identity before the show snatches the answer away. It is the season first real announcement that the story is moving toward the door it has been knocking on for a year. Soon after, a smaller piece arrives, a duel between Mabel and Pacifica Northwest on a mini golf course in a thunderstorm, and although it works as a standalone comedy, it is also the show's first sustained look at Pacifica, the cartoonishly wealthy rival who will, over the course of the season, be allowed to become a real person. Her arc, although it is quieter than the cosmic plot, is one of the kindest stories the show tells. She is introduced as a snob. She is gradually revealed, episode by episode, as a child the show has compassion for, raised in a house run on the same kind of long shadow that runs the Mystery Shack, and her eventual choice to break with her parents in an episode called Northwest Mansion Mystery. where she opens a sealed window to invite ordinary townspeople into a haunted family party, is the show in miniature, a single small moral act made enormous by the weight of family. Gravity Falls is generous to its side characters in a way most cartoons cannot afford to be. It gives Wendy, the laid-back teen Dipper has a crush on, real interiority, and treats Dipper crush itself with a tenderness that does not flinch from how foolish it sometimes makes him look. It gives Seuss, the Mystery Shack handyman, the moral arc of an adult who has never been treated as one. It gives Old Man McGucket, the local lunatic who appears in the first season as a running comedy bit, the most devastating reveal in the second. Almost no character in Gravity Falls is only what they look like the first time you meet them, and you start to suspect, very quickly into Season 2, that the same thing is true of Stan. The fourth episode of the second season is the one that sets the second half of the series alight, and its name is Sock Opera. On the surface, it is a story about Mabel falling for a charming nerd in town and roping the whole shack into helping her stage a puppet show to impress him, while Dipper, frustrated by a code in the journal he cannot crack, finally agrees to a deal he should never have agreed to. The show has been telling you for an entire season that Bill makes deals. Bill offers things you cannot have any other way in exchange for things you do not yet know are valuable. Dipper, in a moment of exhaustion, accepts Bill's offer to help him decipher the code, and Bill Price, when he names it, is a body. Specifically, Dipper Body. The episode goes from charming to genuinely unsettling in the space of a single shot. Bill possesses Dipper. He puppets him around the shack with a sloppy, wide-eyed grin, breaks his own fingers to test the limits, throws himself downstairs because it is funny, and uses Dipper hands to destroy the journal so that Dipper can never finish what he started. The whole episode hinges on Mabel, who has been busy with her puppets, eventually realizing that her brother is not her brother, and on her choosing. In the climax, between the chance she has been hoping for all week and the safety of the brother she has not been paying attention to, she chooses her brother. The journal is saved. Bill is, for the moment, expelled, and the show lets the camera linger after the threat passes on Dipper sitting alone, exhausted, processing the fact that something else was inside him for an evening. It is the kind of scene most family cartoons would never include. Gravity Falls includes it, and the season is only 4 episodes in. The 7th episode of the second season is the one that picks up the thread fans had been pulling at since the first season, which is the question of who the man called Old Man McGucket really is. McGucket has appeared, by the time this episode arrives, in dozens of small moments. He is the inventor who built a giant gobbling robot in the very first season because he missed his son. He is the toothless drifter who appears at town events to scream a warning nobody listens to. He is the one Dipper and Mabel run into in the woods again and again, talking to himself in a voice that suggests he used to talk to someone else. The episode in question, called Society of the Blind Eye, follows a thread of strange townspeople who claim to be missing important memories, and leads the children, with a quiet inevitability, to a chamber hidden behind a normal-looking storefront, where a group in red robes calmly explain that the entire town has been having its uncomfortable memories erased for decades by a private organization that has decided this is a kindness. The kicker, the gut punch the episode is waiting to deliver, is that the founder of this society, the man who built the memory erasure gun and used it the most times on himself, is McGucket. He shows up in a flashback in a clean white lab coat and rectangular glasses and a calm, steady, intelligent voice that has nothing to do with the voice the audience has known him by for a season and a half, and you understand in real time what has happened to him. Something broke this man, something so unbearable that he chose to remove the memory of it, again and again, until the man who originally had the memory was, functionally, gone. The episode lets him remember what he was. He sits there in the chamber under the red light with his life rolling out in front of him, and the show does not flinch from how sad it is. McGucket built that gun because he had seen something he could not live with, and the something he had seen, the show is finally ready to tell you, was the thing on the other side of the portal in Stan basement. McGucket worked for the author. McGucket helped build that machine. And when the machine first opened, decades earlier, McGucket looked through it. And what he saw was so wrong that he spent the rest of his life trying to forget it. Society of the Blind Eye is technically an episode about a small-town conspiracy. It is, in practice, the episode that gives Gravity Falls its real moral weight. Memory in this show is a resource. People have it taken away from them. People give it up. People hold it for each other. And the show is preparing the ground, although you do not realize it yet, for a final battle that is going to hinge on exactly that, on memory as a weapon and as a sacrifice. After McGucket remembers, the season moves forward with the rare confidence of a show that has already shown you its hand. The long-postponed return of Blendin Blandin arrives in an episode called Blendin Game, where the twins are dragged into a future time travel arena and forced to fight for their lives over a small wrong they did in an earlier episode, and the show takes the opportunity, in the middle of all that, to give the twins a birthday flashback. Dipper and Mabel were born on the same day. The show is very precise about this. They are not just twins by the standard meaning of the word. They are siblings who share a birthday, and the flashback the episode shows, of two newborns reaching for each other in the hospital crib, lands like the thesis statement of the entire series. You came into this world together. You are going to keep choosing each other, the show is saying, even when the world starts trying to pull you apart. Blendin Game also reveals, almost as an aside, that Dipper's full name is Mason, and the show treats this revelation with the same lightness it treats most of its disclosures. Just a passing line, no underscoring, no flourish. The twins win. Blendin gets a kind of mercy. And the show moves on, with the twins still 12 years old, still inseparable, still on a collision course they cannot yet see, because the next several episodes are going to start picking that bond apart with surgical patience. The reason for that collision course becomes clear in an episode the show built its entire engine to deliver, an episode called Not What He Seems, which sits about 11 episodes into the second season. There are episodes of television that change the meaning of the previous season as you watch them. This is one of them. It opens with a fully scored, fully animated, almost surreal flashback to a man at a country fair making a bet on a fortune machine, and the show pulls the camera back just enough to let you wonder, before the title card hits, whether you have ever seen the protagonist of this scene before. You have. He is younger. He is in a leather jacket. He is the man you have spent a season and a half deciding to love. From there, the episode moves at a pace it has never moved before. Powers and Trigger, the federal agents, finally raid the Mystery Shack. They arrest Stan. They reveal that they have linked him to identity fraud spanning decades, that the man calling himself Stan Pines is using a stolen identity. Dipper and Mabel, watching their great-uncle pulled out of his own house in handcuffs, are told that Stan was never who he said he was. The twins escape into the basement, find the portal Stan has been calibrating, find footage of Stan working on the machine, find a note in their own hands warning of cataclysmic consequences if the machine is ever activated, and Stan, who has escaped the federal agents and come down after them, begs them, in the center of the lab, to trust him, to wait, to let him finish what he has come back for. Dipper does not trust him. Dipper goes for the shutdown switch, and Mabel, in a single shot that the show holds longer than any other shot in the series up to that point, stands between the switch and her brother, looks her great-uncle in the face, and chooses to believe him. The portal opens. Light fills the room. A figure walks out of the gate that has been sealed for 30 years. He is tall. He is in a long brown coat. He has 6 fingers on each hand. He is the author of the journals. He is Stan's twin brother. And the show, in the very last shot of the episode, finally lets you see them in the same room. The man you have known and the man he has been hiding for 3 decades, looking at each other across the basement of the Mystery Shack, while the credits load with a cipher that, when decoded, simply reads, "His name is." The reveal had been planted, you realize, in literally the first episode. The 6-fingered hand on the journal cover is the same hand the man on the platform is raising now. Everything connects. Everything was always connected. The show had told you. You just had not been listening. The episode that follows, called A Tale of Two Stans, is the show's single longest contiguous flashback, and it does the work of an entire season in 22 minutes. It is the story of Stanley and Stanford Pines, 2 boys in 1960s New Jersey, inseparable, built almost identical. One of them is a born scientist with 6 fingers on each hand, a quiet, careful, brilliant child whose extra digits the world treats as a freak show. The other is a scrapper, a brawler, a charmer, the kind of brother who hits other children for making fun of his twin and never tells him about it after. They grow up together. They share a bedroom. They share dreams of a future in which they will sail around the world together hunting mysteries. And then, on the night before college, Stanley accidentally damages Stanford project, a project that was going to win him a scholarship, and the family, in a wound the show treats with no melodrama and no excuse, throws Stanley out. He is 17 years old. He has nowhere to go. His father puts him on the porch with a single suitcase and the brother whose project he ruined. The brother he loves lets it happen. They do not speak for years. Stanford goes to a prestigious university, makes his name in unconventional physics, comes to a small Oregon town called Gravity Falls because something there interests him, and meets, in the woods, a being who introduces himself as a muse, a being shaped like a yellow triangle, who calls Stanford brilliant and unfairly overlooked, and who offers him collaboration on a project that will change the world. The being is, of course, Bill. Stanford does not know this. Stanford spends years working alongside Bill, building a portal designed to access the multiverse, only realizing, near the end, that the entity in his ear has been lying about the purpose of the machine the whole time, that Bill intends to use it as a doorway to bring himself and his retinue into this dimension, and that Stanford has been, all along, the unwitting architect of an invasion. By the time Stanford realizes this, the portal is nearly finished. He shuts it down. He hides the journals. He calls the only person he has left to call, the brother he has not spoken to in years, and asks for help. Stanley arrives in Gravity Falls expecting reconciliation. He gets a fight. The brothers argue. Stanley shoves Stanford. Stanford falls into the portal. The portal cannot be reopened without the same calibration that nearly broke it the first time. And Stanley, alone in the woods, looking at the hole his brother just vanished into, makes a decision that defines the rest of the show. He takes Stanford's name. He takes his identity. He spends the next 30 years rebuilding the portal in secret, telling the world he is the brother who is missing, building the mystery shack on top of the lab to pay the bills, and waiting for 30 years to bring his brother home. The episode lays all of this out in a single tight pass, and at the end of it you understand that the man you have been laughing at for 2 seasons has been carrying out the most patient act of love a cartoon ever asked you to recognize. He took the loss of his brother and turned it into a 30-year vow. He never gave up. And the people he had to lie to in order to keep that vow include the great niece and nephew he genuinely came to love over the summer. Which is why, when the portal finally opens and Stanford finally steps out, Stanford greets his rescuer with a punch in the face. The relationship between the two Pines brothers after Ford comes back is the engine of the rest of the show, and it is, to the show's enormous credit, never resolved into a clean reconciliation. They share a kitchen. They share a roof. They argue about everything. Stan, who has spent 30 years becoming the man the world thinks Ford is now expected to step aside and let the real Ford retake his own name and his own house. Ford, who has spent 30 years lost in dimensions he never fully describes, watching his work and his brother slip away, is now back in a house he barely recognizes, with a man he loves and resents in roughly equal measure. The show lets them be petty. The show lets them be small. Ford resents the mystery shack. Stan resents being talked down to. They sit at the same table. They cannot finish a sentence with each other. And in the middle of that, Dipper, who has spent the entire series searching for the author of the journals, gets to meet him and gets, very quickly, into Ford's circle of trust in a way that pulls Dipper away from his great uncle and toward the man who has 6 fingers and 1,000 stories about other worlds. Ford starts to mentor Dipper. He shows him the inside of the lab. He gives him books to read. He teaches him about anomaly patterns. And the show is careful to let you see, on Mabel's face, what this is doing to her. Mabel has spent the whole summer with her brother. They have shared a room above the shack. They have shared every conversation. And now there is a third person between them. An adult man Mabel intuitively does not trust, and Dipper, exhausted by the role of younger sibling, is reaching for adulthood with both hands. The show plants this fault line, gently, in episode after episode of the back half of the 2nd season. It does not make Ford a villain. It does not make Mabel jealous in the cheap way other shows would do. It just lets you watch the gap open. And you know, without being told, that something is going to come through it. In the stretch between the brothers' reunion and the apocalypse, the show takes time for a few quieter, more domestic stories that quietly carry their own weight. There is The Stanchurian Candidate, a comedy about Stan running for town mayor, which on its surface is exactly what it sounds like, but is also doing slow work on the Stan question. It shows you again that Stan is more capable than he lets on, that his bluster covers a real grounded intelligence, and that he is not in fact content with the small life he appears to be living. There is The Last Mabelcorn, which sends Mabel on a hunt for a unicorn hare to ward off Bill, while Ford hides in the underground lab trying to figure out how to defend his own mind from Bill long term. The unicorn turns out to be a fraud, a self-important, judgmental creature whose blessing is, in the show language, just a piece of social theater. The hare works anyway, because the show is willing to be cynical about purity and earnest about effort, but the real value of the episode is what it tells you about Bill. Bill cannot enter a mind that is properly warded. Bill cannot break in. Bill has to be invited. And Bill is, the episode shows you, getting agitated. He is running short on time. He is making mistakes. The dream demon, who in Season 1 was a casual theatrical menace, has, by the middle of Season 2, started to act like something with a deadline. That deadline finally tips into catastrophe in the 17th episode of the second season, called Dipper and Mabel vs. the Future, and on a quiet rewatch it is the saddest 22 minutes the show ever made. The episode begins with the twins planning their 13th birthday party. They have lists. They have a piñata. Suze is helping. The party is, in their minds, the marker of one summer ending and another stage of life beginning. Mabel goes to set up the party in an abandoned warehouse Stan has rented her, and the show lets you sit with her, alone, in this big, half-decorated room, looking at the list of all the things she still has to set up before the party can happen. And then, slowly, the show begins to fracture. Mabel runs into older versions of her friends who are about to leave Gravity Falls. Wendy is going off to high school. Suze has plans. Robbie is leaving. The town is preparing to end the summer, and Mabel, with her piñata and her bunting, realizes in real time that nothing is going to stay the same. She is going to go back to California. She and Dipper are going to grow up. Childhood is, in a literal sense, almost over. While Mabel is having this realization, Dipper is in the lab with Ford, who offers him an apprenticeship. Ford tells Dipper that he can stay in Gravity Falls. He can train under Ford. He can become the inheritor of the journals in a way the journals themselves only hint at. Dipper hesitates. He says he needs to talk to Mabel. He goes to find her. And on the road to the warehouse, in a soft, melancholy stretch the show paces like a funeral, Mabel meets Bill in the body of a kindly stranger. And Bill talks to her. He tells her she does not have to lose anything. He tells her she can keep her brother. He tells her that the small interdimensional rift Ford has been carrying around in a snow globe, which Mabel happens to be carrying for him because Ford left it in her bag, could, if she gave it to him, be the thing that keeps the summer going. Mabel does not know what the rift is. She does not know who she is talking to. She just knows she does not want it to be over. She hands the globe over. The rift breaks. The sky cracks open above Gravity Falls. Reality begins to come apart. And the episode ends on Mabel, alone, in the rain, watching her own decision turn the sky into a black geometric tear, while the boy who has just been offered her brother Future is sprinting through the woods to find her and is going to be too late. Weirdmageddon is the name fans gave the final 3 episodes of the show, and although it is, in form, an end-of-the-world story, what it is really about, underneath the spectacle, is responsibility. Bill arrives. He brings his friends, a group of older, weirder, more dangerous entities the show calls the Hench Maniacs, who are designed by the animators as a kind of crawling carnival, each one a different shape of wrong, and the show lets them loose on Gravity Falls without softening any of it. The Hench Maniacs eat people. They petrify them. They string them up. They run riot in the streets while Bill, settling into his new form as a fully 3-dimensional creature in the center of town, lays out a kingdom of madness in the middle of Oregon and starts to plan how to expand it outward. Because Weirdmageddon, the show reveals, is locked inside Gravity Falls by a property the town has, a kind of edge of reality cage that Bill cannot leave. And Bill has spent the entire series planning to break that cage. He cannot do it from his own dimension. He needs the rift open. He needs a doorway. He needs the world bigger than this one. And the show makes you understand, in a single shot of him looking out at the planet beyond the trees, that everything we have been watching has been the prelude to him being free. The first part of Weirdmageddon follows Dipper, alone, trying to reach Mabel. Mabel has vanished. Mabel is, the second part reveals, locked in a bubble of her own making, an entire pocket reality Bill has put her in, a place called Mabel Land, where every wall is pink and every bird sings her name, and every horrible thing about growing up has been removed, on purpose, by an entity who knows exactly what Mabel was afraid of when he made the offer. The second part, called Escape from Reality, is a sequence of escalating set pieces in which Dipper, Wendy, and Suze break into Mabel Land to rescue her, and what they actually have to do, in the center of the bubble, is convince Mabel to leave it. The Mabel they find has been there for an unspecified time. She is, in this place, happy. She has Mabel Land Dipper, who never argues with her, never grows up, never leaves. She has every horse, every craft station, every party. And Dipper, sitting across from her at the center of the dream, has to argue with her about something the show has been quietly building toward all season, which is the fact that growing up is not optional, that the love between them does not depend on staying the same age, that her bubble, however gentle, is also a lie. The argument the show writes for that scene is one of the best pieces of dialogue in the series, because it does not bully Mabel. It loves her. Dipper tells her, in his own way, that he is scared too, that he has been scared the whole summer, that he was wrong to consider staying without her, and that they are going home together. Mabel, in tears, agrees. The bubble breaks. They are spat back into the broken world, and the show, having earned the right, points them at the most important fight of their lives. The henchmaniacs have, by this point, captured almost everyone the twins know. The townspeople are statues in the central square. Ford has been turned into a golden statue at the foot of Bill's throne. Stan has somehow dodged capture by a combination of low expectations and good aim, and he is hiding in a junkyard outside town with a small fortress of forgotten Mystery Shack inventory. The twins, Wendy, Suze, and Pacifica, regroup with him there. The plan they put together is the show's last piece of large-scale architecture, and it requires almost every character the show has ever bothered to develop. Old Man McGucket, who has by this point fully recovered his mind, is going to build a giant, mech-sized version of the Mystery Shack to walk into town. The Manitors are going to ride it. Wendy Father, a lumberjack who has been a side character all series, is going to fight at the front. Pacifica is going to do reconnaissance. Suze is going to drive the mech. The whole plan is, in form, a children's show finale of the most familiar kind, a big colorful mech battle on a city street, but the show drapes it in real weight, because every fighter you see arriving has been earned, episode by episode, sometimes over years of screen time. When Pacifica looses an arrow at a henchmaniac, you remember the haunted mansion. When McGucket commands the Shacktron, you remember the man under the bridge, screaming at strangers with nothing left of himself. The show calls in every favor it has ever banked. And it is not enough. Bill kills the mech with a finger. Bill kills McGucket effort with a flick. The fighters are scattered, most of them are captured. The plan, in conventional terms, has failed. And what is left, in the center of town, is the only thing the show has been actually building toward, which is the two Pines brothers and the two Pines twins, with a memory gun in their pocket and one last idea. That last idea is simple, and it is, in form, a con. Stan, the lifelong con artist, the man whose career has been built on getting people to underestimate him, agrees to do the one thing only he can do. Bill, who needs the equation that locks the cage around Gravity Falls broken from inside, has been trying to get Ford to give him the names of the people who can break it, and Ford has refused, even under torture. The brothers swap. Stan, in Ford coat, walks up to Bill. Ford, in Stan coat, hides nearby with the memory gun. Bill assumes he is talking to the brother he has known for decades, and Stan, dropping the act in his own way, calls Bill bluff and offers himself as the doorway. Bill enters Stan Mind to take what he wants. The brothers spring the trap. Stan Mind, the show shows you in a long, devastating interior sequence, is full of memories and rooms and people, and Bill, trapped inside it, only realizes too late that the entrance the brothers offered him was a tomb. Ford fires the memory gun. The memory of Stan, the entire mind of Stan, is erased to erase Bill with him. Bill, screaming, is unmade. And the show, knowing exactly what it is doing, holds on the moment after, when Mabel and Dipper run to their great uncle and find a man sitting on the ground with a blank face who does not know who they are. Stan saved the world. Stan paid the price. He looks at his great niece. He says, "Hello, friend." And the show, instead of letting this be the ending, gives Mabel one more move. She sits next to him with a scrapbook. She walks him through the summer. Photograph by photograph, joke by joke, she puts the memory back. The show lets you sit through the entire montage. And on the last page, Stan blinks, smiles, says her name. Suze cries. Dipper cries. Ford cries. The credits roll for the first time on a show that has just, in 22 minutes, ended a war by spending its main character life as the bullet. The finale does not end there. The show, having reached the peak it built itself toward, does the harder work of letting the world come back. The townspeople, dazed, return to themselves. The henchmaniacs, without their boss, are gone or stone or both. Bill is, as far as anyone in the room can see, dead, his last form a giant gold statue at the foot of an empty throne. Ford and Stan, sitting on the porch of the Mystery Shack as the sun comes back, talk to each other for the first time in 30 years as themselves. Ford apologizes. Stan apologizes. It is not a clean reconciliation, because the show does not believe in clean reconciliations, but it is real. They make plans to go to sea together, just like they planned when they were children, in a boat called the Stan-O War that has been sitting in their imagination since they were small enough to share one bedroom. The plan is to spend their remaining years sailing around the world together, looking for anomalies. Looking, you understand, for the time they lost. The Mystery Shack itself, with the apocalypse over and tourist season returning, needs an owner. Stan, with the look of a man who has finally found his exit, hands the deed to Suze, who has, the show reveals with no fanfare, been the man at the center of the shack the whole time. Suze, in tears, accepts. The new Mr. Mystery suits him. And the twins, with one final morning on the porch, board a bus home to Piedmont, California, on the last day of summer. And the show plays them out with a slow montage of every character on the porch. Waving, Wendy, Pacifica, Candy, Grenda, McGucket, Stan and Ford, Suze, the town, the trees. And the show ends, not on a triumph, but on a goodbye that has cost everyone in the frame more than anyone in the frame is going to say out loud. It is worth pausing on what the show did in those final episodes, because the choices it made were unusual for a children animated series on a major American network in 2016. Disney, by the time Gravity Falls reached its finale, had been running the show on Disney XD, having moved it off Disney Channel midway through the second season, and the show had been broadcast on a famously irregular schedule. With months between episodes during its final stretch, a schedule Hirsch later spoke about publicly with frustration. Despite the air dates being scattered, the show held a coherent final shape because the team had already decided how the story was going to end years in advance. Hirsch has been on record saying that he chose to end the show at 2 seasons because he wanted to tell a complete story, not because the network forced his hand. The decision drew real attention in the animation industry because long-running children's shows almost never end themselves voluntarily. Gravity Falls did, and the cleanliness of the ending, the way every character is given a goodbye, the way the final shot of the show rests on the back of the bus carrying the twins home, is a function of that artistic restraint. The finale aired in February of 2016. The world watched. The internet in real time began to take it apart. What the world found when it took the finale apart is the layer of cipher that the show had been embedding in itself since the very first episode. Gravity Falls had been hiding messages in every credit sequence, in every interstitial card, in every printed sign in the background of episodes. The ciphers came in several flavors. Some were Caesar shifts, where each letter is moved a fixed number of places along the alphabet. Some were @bash ciphers, where each letter is replaced by the letter at the equivalent distance from the other end of the alphabet. Some were numerical substitutions, where numbers replace letters by ordinal position. Some were visionary ciphers, which require a keyword, sometimes given in the previous episode and sometimes given much earlier. Some were entirely visual, drawn into a runic alphabet only readable if you spent a weekend learning it. Some, in the final stretch of the show, used multiple ciphers stacked on top of each other. The internet, in love with the show, decoded them. And what the decoded messages contained was, in part, a layer of pure flavor, mythological hints and goofs and behind-the-scenes jokes, but in another part, a layer of real story, including, in the Season 1 finale credits, the cipher whose decoded message reveals the words "His name is Stanford Pines," 3 episodes before the show formally tells you anything about a brother. The cipher layer is one of the reasons Gravity Falls retains its devoted following. Almost no other children's show of that era treated its credits as part of the story. Gravity Falls did, and once you have decoded one, the entire show feels rearranged, because the show now has, in your head, a backstage you can walk through. The other reason Gravity Falls retains its devoted following is what fans, by tradition, call the axolotl theory. And to understand it, you need to follow the show out of the show itself and into the books and bonus materials that came after. Several months after the finale, Hirsch released a tie-in volume called Journal 3. A recreation of the journal Dipper had been carrying all series, hand-annotated, with every page filled in. The book contains a single, careful, mostly serious entry near the end, written in Ford voice, in which Ford describes a conversation he claims to have had with an ancient entity, in a moment of life or death, an entity called the Axolotl, which he describes as a kind of cosmic being older than Bill, older than the dimensions Bill ate, and able, in certain conditions, to grant a kind of afterlife or rebirth to those it judges worthy. The Axolotl, in the entry, speaks a poem. The poem is short. It is also, in its own form, a structured incantation. The lines describe a being shaped by 60 degrees in threes, watching from inside birch trees, having watched his own dimension burn, who misses home and cannot return, who claims to be happy and is lying, who is blamed for an arson, who must, if he wants to escape that crime, invoke the axolotl name. The poem ends with a promise, one way to absolve the crime, a different form, a different time. The fans, on reading this entry, understood immediately what it meant. Bill, the axolotl is saying, is not, in the strict sense, gone. Bill burned his own dimension. Bill is to blame for the fire. Bill, the prophecy says, can absolve himself if he is willing to come back, in a different form, in a different time, and speak the axolotl name. The show does not, in any of its episodes, narrate this directly. The axolotl appears, by some readings, in a single off-color pink frame during Weirdmageddon, when Bill is being unmade in the center of Stan's mind, and Bill, in those last moments, screams a long, impossible word that fans, decoding it through the show ciphers, have translated as the axolotl name. Reading the show this way is interpretive. Reading the prophecy as confirmed canon is a stretch. But the prophecy itself, as written, exists in a book Hirsch personally signed off on, and fans have spent the better part of a decade arguing, often persuasively, that Bill is not. In the cosmic ledger of the show, finished, the argument gathered new force in the summer of 2024, when Hirsch published a follow-up volume called The Book of Bill, a small black hardback in the voice of Bill himself, full of taunts, riddles, ciphered messages, and a sustained, manic, theatrical account of Bill's personal history. The Book of Bill is not formally an episode of the show. It is a tie-in volume in a long line of tie-in volumes, and it should be treated with the caution that any tie-in deserves. That said, what the book explicitly contains, in the form of letters and asides from the entity itself, is a more or less complete account of where Bill came from, which the show had hinted at without ever quite confirming. Bill, the book lays out, was originally from a two-dimensional universe, a flat world of geometric creatures who lived inside the rules of plane geometry, and Bill, in his own youth, had a vision of a third dimension a layer above his own. He told his fellow citizens. They thought he was mad. They locked him up. They denied the existence of the up direction. And Bill, in a rage the book treats with no remorse, set fire to his own dimension and burned it down with his family, his friends, and every two-dimensional creature he had ever known, and stepped, through the conflagration, into the third dimension to live as a god. This is the arson the axolotl prophecy refers to. This is the home he can never return to. This is the lie behind the comedy mask that the show, for 40 episodes, only let you see in glimpses. The Book of Bill, depending on how you read it, makes Bill enormously more pitiable, because the demon you have been afraid of is now revealed to be a child who lost everything in part because he was right about a truth nobody around him could see, and enormously more monstrous because the same child chose to murder an entire universe rather than live alone with that knowledge. The show, in retrospect, contains both readings. You can find scenes that support either, and in that ambiguity is some of the reason the fan base has never quite let the story go. The Book of Bill also, depending on how you read its frame story, suggests that Bill is technically still around. It is presented as having been written by Bill from somewhere, addressed to a reader he is taunting. The ciphers in the book, when decoded, contain messages that fans have read as instructions for further engagement, hints at sequels, breadcrumbs for things that might still come. Hirsch, in interviews, has been careful not to confirm a continuation of the show in any specific form, but he has also been careful not to close the door. And the Cipher Hunt of 2016, which was a real-world treasure hunt organized by Hirsch through public clues delivered on social media, with fans collaborating across continents to find a hidden statue of Bill in an Oregon forest, established that he is willing to extend the show into the world in ways that very few creators are willing to do. The statue, when it was found, was photographed and shared and is now part of the show real-world artifact set. The fact that the statue was a statue of Bill, sitting in a forest, with one hand outstretched, is not an accident. The post-credits sequence of the very final episode of the show shows Bill, after Weirdmageddon, frozen in stone in a forest, with one hand outstretched, with a single bird sitting on his finger. The implication is not that he is dead. The implication is that he is, in some way, waiting, and the Cipher Hunt statue made that waiting literal, in the woods of Oregon, where a real person could go and find him. If Bill is the show villain, the show cosmology around him is, on a close reading, much larger than him, and one of the most rewarding deep dives in Gravity Falls is the question of how exactly the universe of the show is structured, because the show drops, in passing, more lore about the shape of reality than it ever quite collects in one place. Bill comes from a two-dimensional plane he calls, in the Book of Bill and in journal entries, the second dimension. Earth, in this scheme, is the third dimension. There are, the show implies, an unspecified number of dimensions above this one, and there are travelers, the time anomaly removal crew, who walk between them. Time Baby, an enormous floating infant in armor, is introduced in Season 1 as the ruling figure over the time agency, and he is, by his appearance in Weirdmageddon, easily the most powerful figure the show has ever shown you, calling Bill out by name and arriving with an army to settle the matter. Bill, with one shot, vaporizes him. It is a moment that recalibrates the cosmology in real time. The Time Baby, presented for 2 seasons as the closest thing to a top-of-the-chain authority, is killed in a flash, and the implication is that Bill, even before Weirdmageddon, was more than the universe regulators were ready for. The show implies, although it does not state, that the entities in Bill retinue, the henchmaniacs, are figures of similar rank from other dimensions Bill has eaten, that they are not his subordinates by nature but his collaborators in a project of long, slow erasure. Their names, in some cases, are funny. Their behavior is not. The henchmaniacs called 8-Ball, Keyhole, and Cryptos, among others, are all designed in the same flat geometric language as Bill himself, and the implication, never spoken aloud, is that they are kin, that they came from the same kind of place, and that they have all, in their own way, lost what Bill lost. Reading the show this way makes Weirdmageddon a kind of refugee invasion as much as it is an apocalypse. A parade of orphans from worlds nobody can prove existed anymore, arriving in this one as the last place to do harm. Whether the show wants you to feel for them is left, deliberately, an open question. There is a parallel theory, sometimes called the multidimensional Pines theory, which extends out of the Book of Bill and a few offhand lines in the show itself, that the Pines family has, on some level, always been entangled with the dimensional structure of this universe. The argument runs as follows. Ford, when sucked into the portal at the end of A Tale of Two Stans, did not vanish into nothing. He spent 30 years traveling through the multiverse, an exile from his own dimension, and the show, in passing references and bonus material, suggests he visited dozens of timelines and worlds. Some of those worlds, the implication goes, had versions of his own family in them. Some had versions of Bill. The Book of Bill, read this way, contains glimpses of timelines in which the brothers reconciled earlier, in which they reconciled never, in which one of them died in childhood. The show itself, in its final stretch, plays with the same idea. Bill, when he loses, screams that he could win in another timeline. The credits in the final Cipher run drop references to events that have not happened in this story but may be happening in others. The theory is not exactly that there are other Gravity Falls. The theory is that the show, in its choices, is conscious of being one of many possible versions of itself, that the timeline you watched is the timeline in which the brothers reconciled, in which the twins chose each other, in which Stan paid the price himself, and that other timelines are darker. Whether this is a real interpretive intention by Hirsch or an enthusiastic overreading by fans is one of the things the Axolotl prophecy line about a different form, a different time, has kept alive. The show is willing, almost more than any other animated show of its era, to let the door stay open. Inside the show, the Cosmology of Dimensions has a parallel argument about the nature of the journals themselves, and this is a piece of theory worth taking seriously, because it is built almost entirely out of in-show evidence. The 3 journals were written by Ford, on Earth, during his collaboration with Bill, and the show treats them as a kind of grimoire, a catalog of monsters and warnings. But on closer reading, the journals are not arranged by topic. They are arranged by emotional state. Journal 1 is the work of a confident young scientist who thinks his collaborator is a muse. Journal 2 is the work of a man whose collaborator has begun to feel wronged. Journal 3 is the work of a man who has lost the argument and is writing his last warnings before sealing the books in the trees. And that is why Journal 3 contains the most desperate annotations, the most personal asides, and, in its final pages, the suggestion that the author should not be trusted, which is a sentence that becomes more chilling once you know the author is the one writing it. The journals in this reading are a portrait of a man losing his mind in slow motion, and Ford, in the show present, is the man at the other end of that decline, the one who came out of the portal angry, paranoid, and, the show suggests, not entirely well. The shift in his behavior during the back half of Season 2, the way he hoards information, the way he picks favorites, the way he resents Stan even after 30 years of waiting, is consistent with a man who has been in survival mode so long that he has forgotten how to be in the same room as people who love him. The show does not pathologize him. It just lets him be a man who has come back wrong. And the journals, when Dipper reads them in the 2nd season, contain the receipts. There is a softer thread that runs alongside the cosmic plot, and that thread is Mabel. The show is, in the open, about an ancient demon and a family secret. The show is, underneath, about Mabel and the question of what kind of person she is going to become, and the question of what kind of growing up the show is going to allow her. Mabel is 12 when the show begins and 13 when it ends. She is, in the language of children television, the comic relief sister, the one with the sweater catalog and the pet pig, the one whose plots are usually about boys or crafts or rivalries with Pacifica. The show allows her to be all of those things, and then, very carefully, allows her to be more. Mabel makes mistakes. Mabel gives Bill the rift. Mabel hides in a bubble. Mabel argues with her brother. Mabel chooses the wrong puppet show suitor. Mabel, in the time travel episode where she tries to fix a single embarrassing photograph, learns that her instinct to repair her own past is itself a kind of trap. Mabel, in sock opera, learns that there is no version of attention to a boyfriend worth losing her brother. Mabel, in the finale, gives Stan his memory back. The show, in its quietest scenes, treats Mabel as the moral spine of the family. The Pines men in this story go to extremes. They build portals. They sail the multiverse. They take each other identities. Mabel, by contrast, is the one who keeps people in the room. The show argues, although it never makes the argument out loud, that without Mabel, none of the Pines men would have survived the summer. She is the one who chooses Stan in Not What He Seems. She is the one who recognizes Bill in sock opera. She is the one who brings Stan back at the end. And the show signs off, on the bus home, on her sleeping against her brother's shoulder, because the show knows what it has been doing the whole time. Mabel is also, on a darker reading, the show study of what the world does to girls who refuse to grow up on schedule. The Mabel Land bubble is not a random fantasy. It is built, beat for beat, out of the things Mabel has been told she will lose. Wendy is going to high school. Mabel is going to 7th grade. The boys are leaving. Her brother is being offered an apprenticeship by a stranger. The summer is ending. The bubble is a refuge designed specifically to hold a 13-year-old girl who has decided that the world is unfair and that staying small is the only protest available to her, and Bill knows it. The reason Bill is dangerous in that scene is not that he is a demon. The reason Bill is dangerous is that he is listening. The show, in that arc, is more honest about the experience of being a young girl on the edge of adolescence than almost any other animated American children's show of its era. Mabel, in the bubble, is not a child throwing a tantrum. She is a person trying to negotiate with time, and Dipper, when he finally finds her, does not try to scold her out of the bubble. He sits with her in it. He tells her he is scared too. He tells her he was wrong to consider leaving. He treats her as a person making a real decision, and he asks her, in his own way, to come home with him. That is the scene the show has been building toward all series. That is the moment Mabel becomes 13 on her own terms. And the show, in the next frame, lets her keep her sweater and her glitter and her pig. Because growing up in Gravity Falls never required becoming somebody else. It just required choosing what you wanted to take with you out the door. Stan is the other moral spine of the show, and where Mabel's arc is about choosing to grow up, his arc is about being allowed to be loved after a lifetime of being unloved. Stan, in the flashbacks, is the brother who was thrown out by his own father, who lived in his car, who tried to be a magician, a salesman, a boxer, a smuggler, a small-time fraud, who failed at almost everything he tried, who was, by his own standards, a man defined by his disappointments. The Mystery Shack is, in this light, not a tourist trap. The Mystery Shack is the place where, for the first time in his life, Stan succeeded at something. And the something was simple. The running of a small business in a small town in the woods, with a niece and a nephew who came to him by accident and who decided to love him without knowing what he had done to deserve it. The show argument is that family is, in part, who chooses you, and Dipper and Mabel choose Stan over and over again, before they know what he has been hiding, before they know what is in the basement, before they know about Ford. They choose him because he picked them up at the bus station, because he gave them an attic to share, because he yelled at them in the way only family yells, because he showed up. And when the show finally puts Stan on the chopping block and not what he seems, the choice Mabel makes, to stand in front of the shutdown switch and trust him, is the choice the show has earned with 30 episodes of small, mundane affection. Stan, by the end, has the brother he lost, the nephew and niece who saw him for who he was, and a successor in Seuss who treats his work with reverence. He goes to sea with Ford. He gets, in his old age, the life he was supposed to have at 17. The show, in its quietest move, refuses to let his life have been a waste, and it does so by letting the people who love him do the work of telling him so. Dipper, between these two, occupies the role of the show point of view character without ever quite getting the show emotional weight, which is a careful decision on the writer's part. Dipper is the one with the journal. Dipper is the one who narrates. Dipper is the one whose voice opens the series and closes it. He is, in the most literal sense, the protagonist. But he is also, on a long view, the character who learns the most by losing the least, because his arc is, fundamentally, about humility. Dipper begins the series as a boy who treats every adventure as a chance to prove himself. He wants to be brave. He wants to be smart. He wants to impress Wendy. He wants to be taken seriously. And the show, instead of rewarding him, repeatedly takes him apart. He fails the manliness ritual. He fails to impress Wendy. He fails to keep Bill out of his head. He fails to protect the journal. He fails in the apprenticeship moment to recognize that Ford offers a temptation specifically engineered to pull him away from Mabel. Dipper, by the end of the show, has not become Ford. He has not become Stan. He has not become any of the men the show kept dangling in front of him as models. He has instead become a slightly older version of himself, the version who chooses his sister, who chooses to go home, who chooses to leave Gravity Falls knowing he has not solved every mystery in it. The show argument is that Dipper inheritance is not the journal. The show argument is that his inheritance is the choice to put the journal down. The very last shot of him in the show is on the bus with Mabel, no longer the boy chasing the man in the woods. He has come back. And the show, in its kindness, allows him to be 12 a little while longer. Ford, the man Dipper might have become, is, on a sustained look, the most complicated piece of writing in the series. He is, in his own way, a study of a person who is brilliant and damaged in roughly equal measure. The show is careful, in the back half of Season 2, to let Ford be useful and intelligent and competent without papering over the things 30 years of solitary survival have done to him. He hoards. He calculates. He treats Mabel with a politeness that does not quite reach affection. He treats Stan, for most of his time on screen, as an obstacle to be tolerated. He treats Bill, at one moment, with the recognition of a man who was, despite everything, once in a relationship he cannot fully describe out loud. There is a passage in Journal 3 where Ford writes, in the voice the show carefully preserves on the page, that for years he believed Bill genuinely valued him, that he believed Bill chose him for who he was, and that the realization that Bill was using him was the worst thing he had ever survived. This is, in the language of the show, the closest the series comes to letting one of its characters describe a betrayal at the scale of a relationship. The show does not romanticize it. The show is also unwilling to flatten it. Ford is a man who was, in his isolation, vulnerable to a being who knew how to talk to him, and the rest of his life is a long correction. He builds bunkers. He builds wards. He builds a memory gun. He hides from his own brother because he cannot stand to be in a room with someone who might know him that well again. And the show, in the finale, finally lets him sit on a porch with the brother he wronged and apologize. The journey is small. The journey is huge. The show treats it as both. The other Pines presence in the show, the third leg of the older generation, is Sus Ramirez, the Mystery Shack handyman, and his arc is, in some ways, the most quietly beautiful piece of structure in the series. Sus is introduced as a comic figure, a hulking, gentle, slightly slow young man who fixes appliances and works for Stan, with no apparent ambition beyond being allowed to stay. Over the 2 seasons, the show lets you see in pieces why he is the way he is. His father left him as a child. His mother is absent. His grandmother raised him. He has been, his whole life, looking for a man to call something like a father. And the man he found is Stan, who underpays him and yells at him and, very quietly, loves him in the only language Stan knows. Sus is the one who fixes the shack. Sus is the one who feeds the pig. Sus is the one who, in Weirdmageddon, drives the giant mech against Bill, not because he is a soldier, but because his employers asked him to. And when Stan, in the final episode, hands him the deed to the Mystery Shack, the show is acknowledging that Stan has, in the absence of biological children, made one anyway. The arc is the arc of a man being given the family he chose, and the show signs off on him in a pose that mirrors Stan in episode 1, standing at the door of the shack, ready to swindle the next tourist who wanders down the road, with a sweetness Stan never quite had and a fez that suits him. Wendy Corduroy is the one of the show characters most often discussed by fans for a reason that is partly aesthetic and partly emotional. She is the laid-back 15-year-old who works at the Mystery Shack, who Dipper has a crush on, who eventually finds out about the crush, and who handles the situation with a maturity that the show makes look effortless. Wendy is, in a children's show, the kind of character who could have easily been written as a prop, an unattainable older girl whose only function is to be admired and lost. The show refuses that. She has her own friends. She has her own life. She has her own family, the lumberjack Corduroy household, whose father is a sort of cartoon archetype made human by the show's willingness to let him love his daughter without comment. Her own arc, across the 2 seasons, is small and steady. She gets out of a bad relationship. She goes to a movie. She fights Bill in the woods. And in the back half of season 2, when Dipper finally admits his crush to her, she lets him down with a grace the show does not score for laughs. Because Wendy understands, before he does, that what he needed was not a girlfriend but a friend who was older than he was, and she stays his friend. The episode in which they have that conversation is structured like a heist, but the heist is just background. The real action is the conversation in the car. Wendy is, in the show ecosystem, the kind of older sibling Dipper does not have, the kind of figure he needed to be told he could not just leapfrog his way into adulthood by dating into it, and the show is more generous to her than children's shows are generally willing to be. Pacifica Northwest, the rival, is handled with a similar care. She is, in her first appearances, the cartoon embodiment of the bratty wealthy girl, with a private box at every event in town and a habit of looking down on Mabel for sport. The show allows her to be that for several episodes, then begins to crack the surface. The cracks come slowly. There is a sequence in the early stretch of Season 2, a mini golf duel, that shows her, for the first time, in tears in a way the show plays as both comedic and genuinely sad. There is a sequence later in Northwest Mansion Mystery, where Mabel arrives at her house to help banish a ghost and discovers that the ghost is the result of an unrepaid debt the Northwest family incurred generations ago against the working townspeople they exploited, and that the curse on the house is, in a literal sense, the bill coming due. Pacifica in that episode is given a choice between protecting her family reputation and doing the right thing in front of her parents. She chooses the right thing. The cost, the show implies, is permanent. Her parents will never look at her the same way. She drifts, in the back half of Season 2, further from her own family and closer to the Pines twins, and the finale, briefly, allows her to fight alongside them in the battle for Gravity Falls, the daughter of the town's wealthiest family standing next to its working-class lumberjacks against a demon. The show is making a real political argument in that frame, and it is making it without ever spelling it out, which is a sophistication most cartoons in its time slot did not attempt. Old Man McGucket, as discussed earlier, is the moral surprise of the show, but it is worth lingering on him a little longer, because his arc is, in some ways, the show's clearest statement about memory as a form of love. McGucket worked with Ford on the portal. He was Ford's best friend, his collaborator, his lab partner, his confidant. When the portal first opened and McGucket saw what was on the other side, he was traumatized in a way that, the show implies, he could not survive without erasing. He built the memory gun in part to forget what he had seen, and in part, the show suggests, to forget Ford himself, because the friend who had asked him to look through the door had become unrecognizable. The memory gun, used too many times, destroyed McGucket's mind, and the man who roams the woods of Gravity Falls for 2 seasons is what is left after that destruction. The cruelty of his arc is that the audience laughs at him for a long time before the show tells you who he was. The kindness of his arc is that the show eventually does tell you, and when it does, his recovery becomes one of the most quietly thrilling threads in the back half of Season 2. He helps build the Shacktron. He stands with Ford at the battle. He gets, in the post-Weirdmageddon coda, his son back, the same robot-building son the show mocked in the first season, and the two of them are last seen with a small house and a small business and a small life that, by the show standards, is one of the happiest endings any character receives. The journey from comic relief to inventor of a doomsday device to broken hermit to recovered patriarch is, on paper, an impossible arc to land in 40 episodes of a children's show. Gravity Falls lands it. The reason it lands is that the show treats memory loss not as a punchline but as the loss of an actual person, and the moment of return as a real homecoming. The town of Gravity Falls itself, considered as a place, is the subject of one of the longer-running theory threads in the fanbase, and the question the theory tries to answer is why this small valley in Oregon, of all the places on Earth, collects so much strangeness in one location. The show offers, in passing, a partial in-universe explanation that the meteor which formed the basin in prehistoric times carried with it an unusually high level of what the journals call weirdness magnetism, a kind of fundamental physical property of certain matter that draws supernatural events the way iron draws lightning. The valley sits, the show implies, in a place where the laws of physics are slightly thinner than they are elsewhere, and creatures, anomalies, and entities have, over centuries, found their way into the basin and stayed. This is, on its own, a workable piece of show logic. What the theory thread adds is the suggestion that this thinness is also why the town can serve as a cage for Bill. The same property that makes the place hospitable to anomalies also creates, around its edges, a kind of natural barrier through which a being like Bill cannot pass without the cage being broken. The cage, in the finale, is the equation that holds the geometric boundary around the town. Bill needs Ford, or one of a small set of other minds, to break it. He cannot do it himself. The fact that the cage exists at all, the theory goes, suggests that someone, perhaps the same someone who placed the journals or directed McGucket to build the gun, was aware of Bill long before the show begins and arranged the geography in a way that would keep him contained. The axolotl in this reading is a candidate. Time Baby is another. The show, with its usual restraint, names neither. Inside the boundary, the kinds of creatures that the show puts in the woods are not random. The gnomes, the show first monster, are presented as a comic civilization, a tribe of small bearded men who can stack into a giant cloak shape and try to marry teenage girls. The show plays them for laughs. The show also, on a closer look, makes them a quiet study of social desperation. They live in the forest, they have a queen they have lost. They are looking in their own miserable way for a woman willing to lead them. And the comedy of the gnome scenes is partly that Mabel, with one tiny vacuum cleaner and a moment of bravery, defeats the entire community of them on her first day in town. The gnomes return throughout the series, almost always as background, almost always as comic relief, but the fact that they are in the woods at all suggests a forest economy of small creatures the show only ever shows you in fragments. The journal entries hint at this. There are species the journals catalog that you never quite see on screen. There's a kind of forest just out of frame where the journals imply life as we recognize it does not entirely apply, and the show, in its restraint, refuses to ever fully show you the whole. You see edges, you see footprints, you see one multi-bear in a cave, quoting old disco, you see one shapeshifter in a bunker trapped in cryogenic ice. The forest in Gravity Falls is a place that contains more than it shows, and that restraint is, in part, what makes the woods around the Mystery Shack feel as large as they do. The lake itself, on which the show sets one of its earlier episodes, is another of these contained mysteries. The Gobblewonker, a great plesiosaur-looking creature that the twins go to photograph, turns out in that episode to be a robot built by McGucket to gain his son attention. But the show is also careful to seed, in the same episode, glimpses of a real creature in the water that nobody quite catches on camera. The journals, in the official tie-ins, list lake creatures the show never quite verifies on screen. The lake, considered as a location, is the show's first lesson in unreliability. Some of what is in the woods is a trick. Some of what is in the woods is real. The trick of distinguishing them is a skill the journals are trying to teach Dipper across 2 seasons, and the lesson, by the end of the show, is that the difference often does not matter, that the people who refuse to look closely enough to find out are the people who will be eaten by whichever one was real. The Manitors, the mustachioed half-bull men introduced in the Manliness episode of Season 1, are another of the show's quiet metaphorical creatures, and on a careful watch they are doing something more interesting than they first appear. They are a parody of certain ideas of masculinity, the kind of bodybuilding, grunting, chest-pounding aesthetic the show treats with a deliberate cartoon excess. They are also, very specifically, the creatures Dipper turns to when he feels he is not enough of a man, and the episode in which they try to train him is, fundamentally, the show's first sustained engagement with what gender means in this universe. Dipper, in their cave, is asked to kill the multi-bear, a peaceful creature who has done nothing wrong, in order to prove his manhood. Dipper refuses. The Manitors reject him as a man. Dipper, in the climactic frame of the episode, declares that he will define manhood on his own terms and that the refusal to kill is itself an act of strength. The Manitors, in their cartoon way, eventually come around. They join the battle for Gravity Falls. The show, in its restraint, never makes the episode a sermon. It just plants the idea in Dipper's head that the masculinity offered to him by other men is, in this town, often a trap. Ford apprenticeship offer in the back half of Season 2 sits in the same shape. It is, in form, an invitation to manhood. Dipper, the second time, says no. The other creatures in the woods, the lake monster, the shapeshifter, the gremlin, the leprechaun, the gargoyle, the fairies, the unicorns, the multi-bear, the zombies, the cult of the blind eye, the haunted convenience store ghosts, the giant fly, the eye bats, the time gnomes, the underwater children, the puppet demon, the love god, the witches under the dump, the Lilliputians, the gremlin in the windshield, are all, on a careful index, in conversation with the journals as a kind of 19th century catalog of natural history written by a confused naturalist. The journals, in the show Diegesis, are presented as a single man attempt to record a piece of land before its anomalies eat him, and the format is, in tone, more akin to the field notebooks of a frontier naturalist than to any standard horror or fantasy bestiary. The show, in choosing this register, is making a particular argument, which is that the wonder of the place is not in the creatures themselves, but in the patience of the person who decided to catalog them. Ford, in this reading, is the show real hero, the man who turned a town nobody else was paying attention to into a kind of museum. And the tragedy of the show is that the museum was, in the end, built on a foundation he could not see was poisoned. That poison, of course, is Bill, and one of the most enduring theories about him, supplementing what the Book of Bill explicitly reveals, is a thread sometimes called the Muse theory, which argues that Bill, in his initial collaboration with Ford, was not lying about everything, that the Muse function he claimed to perform was, in some sense, real, that Bill is, by nature, a creature that fastens onto brilliant, lonely minds and amplifies them, in exchange for a kind of slow consumption of their will. The theory is built out of small, in-show details. Bill knows things about Ford that Ford has not told him. Bill flatters Ford in ways that read as personalized, not generic. Bill, in the early stages of their collaboration, gives Ford breakthroughs he could not have reached alone. The collaboration, the theory argues, was actually productive for both parties. And that, more than the betrayal, is the thing that haunts Ford afterwards, because Ford does not just have to grieve the loss of a friend, he has to grieve the loss of the version of himself that the Muse was helping him become. The journals, on this reading, are the receipts of that grief. They are written by a man who is mourning his own work as well as his own friend. The show, with its usual restraint, lets this remain an interpretation, but the interpretation accounts for the texture of Ford writing in a way that few other readings do, and it makes the apology to Stan in the finale heavier than it would otherwise be, because Ford has to apologize not just for the night of the shove, but for the years he gave to a relationship that in some way looked from inside like the only thing he had. There is a quieter theory about Bill that is worth saying out loud, sometimes called the constellation theory, and it argues that he is, throughout the show, haunted by his own original dimension in ways the show only shows you in glimpses. Bill returns again and again to certain symbols, certain geometric arrangements, certain sequences of triangles that the Book of Bill eventually confirms are family. The henchmaniacs, the theory argues, are not just allies. Some of them, on this reading, are siblings or parents or partners from the dimension Bill burned, brought across by him in the same fire, kept around as a kind of company. The show never names a henchmaniac as a relative of Bill. The Book of Bill, in its riddles, gestures toward the possibility without quite confirming it. The theory is unconfirmed. The implication, if you accept it, makes Bill enormously stranger, because then his army is, in some sense, his family of survivors, the people he could not bear to leave behind in the dimension he was destroying, and the apocalypse he is bringing to ours is in that reading, the only way he knows to bring them home. The show does not require you to believe this. It also does not foreclose it. The pattern is in the frames. The text is silent on it. Make of it what you will. The Cipher Hunt of 2016, mentioned earlier, deserves its own pause, because it is one of the more unusual pieces of post-show storytelling any animated series of its era engaged in. After the finale aired in February, the show team released a tie-in book and a series of merchandise items. But in the summer of that year, Hirsch took a different approach, posting clues on social media that, when assembled by fans collaborating across the internet, pointed to physical locations on multiple continents. The hunt began with a clue in Russia and chained through additional locations in Europe, Asia, and the United States, with fans working together in real time, decoding clues, photographing landmarks, comparing notes, sometimes meeting in person to share information. The final clue, after several weeks of escalating geographic puzzles, led to a small forested area in Oregon, where a fan in early August found a life-size statue of Bill Cipher made by the show team and placed there for the hunt. The statue had a small treasure box at its base. The box contained a fez, a wax cylinder, and other small items connected to the show. The hunter who found it, in keeping with the spirit of the project, took only what the rules of the hunt allowed and left the rest. The statue, after the hunt, remained in the woods for some time and became, for fans who could travel to it, a kind of small pilgrimage site. The whole exercise, considered as a piece of marketing, was strange. Considered as a piece of community building, it was unprecedented. Hirsch had taken the show into the physical world in a way that almost no other animated children's show creator has ever attempted, and the gesture, in retrospect, fits the show theme. Gravity Falls is, at its core, about reading the world carefully enough to see the things hidden in plain sight, and the Cipher Hunt turned that theme into an actual practice, in real fields and real cities and real woods, with real fans working together to solve real puzzles. The statue, by most accounts, was eventually removed from the original Oregon location, but the photographs of it sitting in the woods remain in fan circulation and remain part of the show living folklore. The credit ciphers, considered as their own layer of the show, are worth looking at slightly more carefully, because the system is more elegant than it first appears. The first season opens with a Caesar shift cipher with a shift of 3, the simplest classical substitution, and the messages in the early episodes are short. As the show progresses, the cipher system grows in complexity. By the middle of Season 1, the Caesar shifts give way to @bash ciphers, which flip the alphabet, and then to numerical substitutions, which require a slightly more attentive decoder. By the second season, the show is using visionary ciphers, which require a key word, and the key word is sometimes embedded in the previous episode credits, sometimes in the previous episode itself, sometimes much earlier in the series. The result is that decoding the full series of ciphers requires not just a key, but the right key, applied to the right cipher in the right episode. Fans built collaborative spreadsheets, online tools, and step-by-step guides to decoding each frame. The total payload of decoded messages, when assembled, includes hints about future episodes, character backstories that the show never quite states aloud, behind-the-scenes jokes, and, in the Season 1 finale, the cipher that reads his name is Stanford Pines, 3 episodes before the show explicitly names Ford as the author. The cipher system is, in a real sense, a second script, running underneath the visible one, and the show is conscious of being read in 2 layers at once. Within the cipher system, the most carefully constructed pieces are the symbols on the wheel that appears in Ford Workshop and on the cover of Journal 3. The wheel has 10 symbols. Each symbol corresponds, the show eventually reveals, to a person in the world of the show. The pine tree is Dipper. The shooting star is Mabel. The question mark is Suze. The ice bag is Wendy. The llama is Pacifica. The crescent moon, by most fan readings, is Gideon. The glasses are McGucket. The 6-fingered hand is Ford. The fish, by common reading, is Stan. The stitched heart is Robbie. The wheel, as a structure, is the key to a prophecy in Journal 3 about the only way to stop Bill, which requires all 10 people, standing in a specific arrangement, holding hands. The show, in the finale, does not deploy the wheel in its prophesied form. Bill attempts to assemble the wheel and is interrupted. The characters do not align. The prophecy fails, and the brothers instead win by an entirely different method involving the memory gun. This is, on a careful reading, one of the show's shrewdest narrative choices. The wheel was set up across the whole series. It would have been the satisfying answer. The show, in the finale, refuses to use it. The reason it refuses is, in part, that Bill, who knew about the wheel, would have been ready for it, and in part that the show is making a quiet argument that prophecies are, in the world of Gravity Falls, often misleading, and that the actual answer to the situation in front of you is, sometimes, the thing the prophecy did not predict. The wheel sits in the journal as evidence of a plan. The brothers, in the moment, do something else. The show, in this gesture, refuses to be the show its own prophecy predicted, and the choice to refuse is, in retrospect, the most show-like thing it could have done. The deals that Bill makes throughout the show, considered as a system, also reward careful attention. Bill is, mechanically, an entity who acquires things by exchange. He cannot simply take. He has to be offered. He has to make a deal. The structure of his deals is consistent throughout the show. One party promises something to Bill. Bill promises something in return. The handshake, with both hands wreathed in blue fire, seals the agreement. The agreement, once sealed, is binding in a way the show treats as cosmically real, not just morally. Gideon, in Season 1, makes a deal with Bill to get the safe combination. Dipper, in Sock Opera, makes a deal with Bill to decode the journal. Mabel, in Dipper and Mabel versus the Future, is offered a deal by Bill in disguise. Stan, in the finale, offers Bill the deal that ends him. The pattern is consistent. The pattern also has a wrinkle, which is that Bill, in the show Diegesis, can lie in the offer but not in the seal. He can mislead. He can omit. He can claim a power he does not technically have. What he cannot do is fail to deliver on the literal terms of a sealed deal. The show treats this as a quasi-physical law. Bill, in this sense, is a kind of contract demon, and his weakness, the brothers eventually realize, is that his contracts can be turned against him if you are careful about the wording. The trap in Stan's mind is, in this reading, a deal that Bill walks into voluntarily because he believes the terms favor him, and the contract is sealed only at the moment he discovers it does not. This is, in form, the oldest folklore trick in the world, and the show, by using it in the finale, places itself in a long lineage of stories about devils outsmarted by their own pride. Gravity Falls, in its choices, knows what kind of story it is. It also knows what kind of story you have been watching, and what kind of ending you have, by the end, been earning. There is a small but recurring theory in the fanbase about the relationship between Gravity Falls and another Disney animated show, The Owl House, created by Dana Terrace, who worked on Gravity Falls in its earlier seasons. Terrace, in interviews, has said that the two shows share a sensibility but not a continuity, and they do not share a universe in any straightforward way. Although they share visual jokes, Easter eggs, and a particular willingness to put real emotional stakes on cartoon adventures. The connection, for fans, is mostly a feeling, a sense that the writers who passed through one project carried something into the next. The shared genealogy is also why some Gravity Falls fans pay close attention to other shows by Hirsch collaborators, looking for tonal continuity and signature themes. The pine tree symbol has appeared in jokes in other shows by veterans of the Gravity Falls writing room. The triangle symbol has appeared in others. These are not, in any strict sense, evidence of a shared universe. They are evidence of a particular kind of creator affection for the things they have made together. Hirsch himself has worked on other projects since Gravity Falls ended, has voiced characters in other shows, and has continued through the tie in books and the Book of Bill to revisit the world of Gravity Falls on his own schedule. There is no current confirmation of a new series or film as of the most recent publicly available information. There are also no confirmed denials. The door, in the language of the show, remains carefully unclosed. Looking back at the show production, the schedule of its broadcast on Disney, and the choices made by its creator, the most interesting piece is the deliberate compression of the second season. The show was originally aired in shorter blocks of episodes with long gaps between them. By the end of its run, the network had begun airing single episodes months apart, with extended hiatuses, and the fan community used those hiatuses to pour into the cipher layer, the credits decoding, and the wider mystery of where the show was going. The hiatuses, in retrospect, helped build the show into the cultural object it became, because the fans, in the absence of new episodes, did the work of close reading the existing episodes, finding patterns the production had embedded years earlier. The show, considered as a piece of media, exists in two forms now. There is the show as it aired, which is 40 episodes of comedy and adventure across 2 seasons, and there is the show as it is read, which is, on the close reading, a 40-episode mystery box with a complete and intentional structure, where almost every joke turns out to be a clue, and every clue turns out, on a third or fourth viewing, to have been pointing at something the show had already shown you. There is a question fans return to, on long anniversary threads, about what happened to the characters after the show ended, and this is where the show, by design, refuses to give a clean answer. The bus pulls away at the end of the final episode. Dipper and Mabel go home to California. Stan and Ford set sail in the Stan O' from a port the show does not name. Seuss becomes Mr. Mystery. The Mystery Shack stays open. Wendy goes to high school. Pacifica, in implication, drifts from her family. McGucket recovers his fortune, reunites with his son, and lives, the show implies, in a kind of late-life happiness he never had as a younger man. The townspeople rebuild. The journals are, by implication, either lost in the destruction of the portal or held by Ford. The axolotl, in the prophecy, still waits. Bill, in the statue, still stands. And the show, refusing to tie down what happens next, lets each viewer decide what kind of ending they want. Hirsch has, in subsequent volumes, expanded on certain pieces of the aftermath. including a wedding sequence in one of the bonus books that fans treat with varying degrees of authority depending on their interpretation of canonicity. The Book of Bill, by its existence, opens the possibility that Bill, in some form, in some time, is still around. The show, on its own terms, is finished. The world of the show, on its own terms, is not. And the negotiation between those two positions is, in part, what has kept the fan base alive for almost a decade after the credits last rolled. The eye, as a symbol, is one of the most consistent visual languages running through the show, and on a careful watch, it is everywhere. Embedded in objects, embedded in nature, embedded in the architecture of the Mystery Shack itself. The wallpaper of the shack has eyes hidden in its repeating pattern. The trees, in certain shots, have eyes carved or grown into them. The buttons on Stan's jacket, in some scenes, have a tiny single eye. Bill, of course, is one large eye in a triangular frame. The show, on a strict reading, is making a single argument with all of these eyes, which is that watching is the primary moral activity in this universe. The journals are an act of watching. The cipher decoders, both the in-show ones and the real ones, are an act of watching. Bill, watching from above, is the demonic version of the same activity. The eye, like memory, is a resource that can be used kindly or cruelly. Forward eye, which the show shows you in close-up several times, is a scientist eye, an eye trained to look closely. Bill eye is a hunter eye, trained to wait. The show puts the two of them in the same frame at several key moments, and the contrast is the show's entire moral architecture in one composition. You are what you watch. You become what you keep your eye on. And the show, by training your eye to look for the hidden symbols, is implicating you in the same practice, training you to be the kind of viewer who notices, which is, in the show, diegesis, the kind of person who survives in a town like Gravity Falls. The Pines family genealogy, considered carefully, is not just two brothers. The show, in passing, mentions other Pines relatives, including the parents of the twins, who appear only briefly in flashback and phone call, and Shermy Pines, the older relative whose existence is sometimes invoked to explain the relationship between Stan, Ford, and the twins. The show is, on this point, slightly ambiguous in its own canon. Stan and Ford are great uncles to Dipper and Mabel. The chain that connects them to the twins runs through a third Pines, who is, in the show, presented only in glimpses. There is a theory, supported by a small number of show references and amplified by tie-in volumes, that the third Pines, sometimes called Shermy, is a baby seen in Stan flashback and grows up to be the twins' grandfather. This makes the timeline of the show, on paper, work, although the specific identity of Dipper and Mabel grandparents is one of the things the show has chosen to keep small and quiet. The family, on a wide view, is a story of fractures and reconciliations across generations. Stan and Ford were thrown apart by their own father. The twins were sent away by their parents for a summer. The Pines line in the show is a line of separations followed by, where the show is willing to be hopeful, returns. The bus that takes Dipper and Mabel home at the end of the show is, in this reading, not a separation, but a return to the parents they were sent away from. The Stan-O War is a return to a brotherhood the older Pines lost. The show argument, in its quietest form, is that families come back together if the people in them are willing to do the work, and that the work is, often, the work of remembering what was good before the fracture. The journals themselves, as physical objects, are one of the most carefully designed pieces of show property in the series. They are leather-bound, they have metal corners, they have a glowing six-fingered hand in gold on the cover. The pages are filled with hand-drawn diagrams, handwritten annotations, taped-in newspaper clippings, photographs, pressed leaves, scraps of fabric, and the occasional ink blot. The show treats each page as a real thing. The tie-in book, Journal 3, reproduces the journal page by page, and the experience of reading it is, by design, like reading the diary of a man losing his mind in slow motion. The font choice in the journal is, in itself, a quiet piece of showcraft. Forward handwriting is consistent throughout, but the steadiness of the line, the spacing of the words, and the use of marginal notes shifts as the journals progress, in a way that mimics, on the page, the deterioration of a person under stress. Dipper's own annotations, written into Journal 3 after he finds it, are visibly different. They are smaller. they are more cramped. They are, on the page, a child trying to keep up with the writing of an adult. And the visual contrast is the show-condensed argument about who Dipper has been all along. The journals, as a piece of book design, are one of the more impressive props ever made for an animated series, and the fact that they exist, in the real world, as actual books you can hold, is part of why the show retains its grip on its audience. The episodes that are sometimes considered less essential, the small standalones, are worth a word of their own, because the show is, in part, the structure of all of them together. The Inconveniencing, the convenience store ghost episode in the first season, is, on its surface, a haunted house comedy. On a careful watch, it is also Dipper's first sustained encounter with Wendy outside the shack, and the way the episode sets up Dipper Crush, lets Wendy speak for herself, and ends on a note of genuine, mutual recognition, is the show-building blocks of a relationship that the back half of Season 2 finally lets resolve. Carpet Diem, the body swap episode in the first season, is, in form, a comedy about a magic carpet that lets the twins inhabit each other's bodies, and in practice an early piece of the show argument about empathy, about how living in someone else's point of view, even briefly, is a kind of love. Boss Mabel, the Season 1 episode in which Stan goes on vacation and Mabel runs the shack, is, on its surface, a comedy about a child trying to be a grown-up, and underneath, an early sketch of the moral leadership Mabel will eventually demonstrate in the finale. The Hand That Rocks the Mabel, the Gideon episode that introduces him as a stalker, is the show's first sustained engagement with what it means to refuse a person who refuses to be refused. And Mabel's handling of it is the show's first quiet statement that her cheer is in part a form of strength. The episode-by-episode list could go on. Every episode of Gravity Falls is, on its own, a small piece of comedy. Every episode of Gravity Falls is, in aggregate, a piece of an enormous, slow argument about how to live in a world that will not always be kind. The show, on its third watch, almost has no idle moments. Roadside Attraction, in the back half of Season 2, is the kind of episode that fans split on, and the reason fans split on it is interesting. The episode is, in form, a road trip in which Stan takes Dipper out of the shack to teach him to flirt with girls at tourist traps, and Dipper, briefly, learns to play the part of a confident teenage charmer. The episode reads, depending on your angle, as a fun outing in which Dipper grows out of his Wendy crush, or as a more uncomfortable piece in which Stan teaches Dipper a kind of dishonest social performance the show otherwise spends its time critiquing. Both readings are in the episode. Both readings, on a careful watch, are part of what the episode is doing. Stan, like every other adult in this show, is offering Dipper a model of how to be a man. Dipper, like the manliness episode in Season 1, takes the model and modifies it. The episode ends with Dipper, on his own terms, having moved past Wendy as a romantic possibility without becoming the kind of person who would pretend to be different girls for different audiences. The lesson, if there is one, is small, and it is the kind of small lesson the show specializes in. You can take what an adult offers you and decline most of it. The way Gravity Falls handles fear is also worth examining, because it is, on a careful watch, one of the few children's shows of its era willing to put real fear on screen without scoring it for laughs. The Bill possession sequence in sock opera is genuinely disturbing. The reveal of McGucket past in Society of the Blind Eye is genuinely sad. The opening of the portal in Not What He Seems is, in the way the lights flicker and the children scream, genuinely tense. The arrival of the henchmaniacs in Weirdmageddon is, in its visual design, genuinely apocalyptic. The show, in these moments, never tips into horror in a way that would push it out of its time slot, but it gets, repeatedly, much closer than other children's shows of its era were willing to. The reason it can do this is in part because it is willing to follow the fear with care. After Bill leaves Dipper body in sock opera, the camera lingers on Mabel sitting with him. After McGucket remembers his past, the show lets him cry. After Stan is arrested in Not What He Seems, the show lets Mabel articulate, in her own words, what trust between family members has to mean. The show, in pairing fear with care, builds a kind of emotional architecture that other shows of its era did not attempt. The viewer, by the end of the series, has been through several real frights, and the show has every time sat with you afterwards. One of the most rewarding pieces of close reading in the show is the layer of background detail in the Mystery Shack itself. The shack, as a set, is the kind of cluttered room that rewards a frame-by-frame look, and the show animators were aware that this would be the case. The taxidermy in the shack contains references to other Disney properties. The signs on the walls contain jokes. The contents of the gift shop change subtly from episode to episode in a way that mirrors the season unfolding. The basement, when it finally appears in detail in the second season, is decorated with the personal effects of a man who has been alone in a small space for 30 years, and the props department gave Stan, on the desk in the lab, a coffee mug, a series of notebooks, a small stack of paperback books, and, in one shot, a photograph the show only ever lets you glimpse, of two boys at the edge of a beach in New Jersey. The photograph is on the desk for the whole second season. The show never makes you look at it, but it is there, and once you know it is there, the basement, in every scene set in it, becomes a different room. Stan has been keeping the photograph the whole time. He has been working underneath the picture of the brother he lost for 30 years. The show, in placing the photograph there without comment, is making the same argument it makes everywhere else. Memory in this show is a form of love, and the people who carry it because they cannot put it down. Stan, in the basement, never puts it down. The voice cast of Gravity Falls is, considered as a piece of craft, one of the show's quiet pleasures, and the fact that Hirsch himself voices Stan, Bill, Seuss, McGucket, and several smaller characters is, on a careful listen, a piece of the show texture rather than a budget choice. Hirsch as Stan is the gravelly New Jersey con artist, all rasp and bluster. Hirsch as Bill is the high-pitched, theatrical broadcasting age demon, all bounce and menace. Hirsch as Seuss is the soft, slow, gentle handyman, all warmth and pause. Hirsch as McGucket is the cracked, drifting, prophetic hermit, all squeal and shake. The fact that these four voices live in one creator throat is, in a strange way, part of the show emotional logic, because the four characters are, in different ways, all variations of a man trying to be loved on his own terms. The show, in casting itself, lets the same person say all of these things, and the result is that the men of Gravity Falls feel, on close listen, like cousins. Jason Ritter, as Dipper, gives the boy a register that lands just on the edge of confidence and uncertainty, the kind of voice that has not quite decided what it wants to sound like as an adult, which is, in itself, a piece of casting that matches the character arc. Kristen Schaal, as Mabel, is the show's secret weapon, a voice that can land a joke and a heartbreak in the same line, often in the same word, and the back half of Season 2 would not work without her. J.K. Simmons, as Ford, brings to the role a deep, careful, slightly weary intelligence that the show needed to make the apprenticeship offer feel like a real temptation. And Linda Cardellini, as Wendy, gives the older girl a casual warmth that makes the rejection in the back half of Season 2 feel kind rather than cruel. The casting, like the rest of the show, was done with care. Almost nothing in Gravity Falls is incidental. The music, considered as its own layer, also deserves a moment, because the show score, by Brad Break, is one of the more distinctive musical signatures of its era. The main theme, an unaccompanied whistle melody over slow strings, is, by design, both unsettling and warm, and the score for the rest of the show alternates between playful adventure cues and the occasional choral piece that the show uses for its biggest moments. The score for the finale, in particular, is willing to let entire sequences play without dialogue, with only the music carrying the emotional weight. The scrapbook montage at the end of Weirdmageddon, in which Mabel walks Stan through the summer to bring back his memory, is, in form, almost entirely musical. And the choice of music in that scene is part of why it works. The show, like its score, knows when to be quiet, and it knows that the moments that matter most often need the least said. The end credit song, when it plays in the finale, is a slower, more wistful version of the show theme, and the choice to let the same melody go from playful to melancholy is in itself a small act of musical storytelling. The Stan and Ford fight, when it finally happens in Not What He Seems, is one of the show's longest physical confrontations, and it is choreographed with a specific intent, which is to show you what 30 years of resentment looks like when two men finally have access to each other again. They argue, they shove, they yell, they land real punches. Stan, who has been hiding the portal his whole life, defends the choice. Ford, who has spent 30 years in dimensions Stan cannot imagine, accuses Stan of negligence. They are right about each other and wrong about each other in roughly equal measure. The fight does not resolve. The show, with characteristic restraint, lets it end in a kind of exhausted stalemate, with both brothers in the same kitchen, neither willing to leave, both unwilling to apologize. The reconciliation, when it comes, is much later. It is, on the porch, in the last episode, the brothers sitting next to each other looking at the sunrise. Ford says he was wrong. Stan says he was wrong. The conversation is short. The conversation is also, on a close watch, the first conversation they have had as themselves since Stan was a teenager. The show, by letting the fight take place in the middle of the series and the reconciliation take place at the end, models a real arc of brotherly repair, in which the apology is not the beginning of forgiveness, but the result of months of being in the same house and refusing to leave. The reconciliation is, in its quiet way, the show argument about how grown men actually heal. They show up. They keep showing up. They eventually run out of reasons not to apologize. The weirdness bubbles, the small spheres of Bill influence that scatter across the country in the final episode, are one of the show's last quiet jokes, and they are also, on a careful reading, a piece of the show theory about how anomaly works. After Bill is defeated, his bubbles, which had been concentrated in the apocalypse over Gravity Falls, dissolve and spread out across the world in invisible form, settling, the implication goes, in places where they will subtly distort reality for years to come. The show does not explain what these bubbles do. The show does not show them again. The implication is that Gravity Falls as an island of weirdness has been replaced, in the aftermath of the finale, by a more diffuse field of weirdness spread thinly over many places, and that the world after Weirdmageddon is not quite the same world as the one before. The implication is also, on a darker reading, that some piece of Bill survives in each bubble, that the entity has been, in the apocalypse, divided across the country rather than destroyed, and that anywhere a bubble has settled is, in some small way, a new piece of his territory. The show does not explore this. The Book of Bill, in some of its riddles, gestures toward it. The fans, on this thread, are still working, and the world of Gravity Falls, by the show implication, is a world in which the boundary between the strange and the ordinary has in part been broken, and the strange is now everywhere. The show treatment of loneliness, more broadly, is one of its quiet themes, and once you start watching for it, you cannot stop seeing it. Stan is lonely. Ford is lonely. McGucket is lonely. Seuss is lonely. Wendy Father is, in a low-key way, lonely. Pacifica is lonely. Robbie is lonely. Even Gideon, on a close watch, is lonely. The show is, in its scaffolding, a collection of lonely people who, over the course of one summer, find ways to be in each other's rooms. The twins, by being twins, are the show's stable center of company, and the show keeps using them as the catalyst by which the lonely men in the orbit of the Mystery Shack are reintroduced to other people. Stan finds his brother. Ford finds his brother. Seuss finds his second father. McGucket finds his son. The show works as a sleep narrative in part because it is, underneath all the action, a long story about people coming back into each other's lives, and that is, by some emotional logic, the kind of story the mind likes to drift off inside of. The dangers in the show, the demons and the portals and the henchmaniacs, are largely external. The repairs, the moments the show actually cares about, are largely interior, and the show paces those interior moments with a calm that makes them easier to fall asleep to than the action sequences. By the time you are listening to the scrapbook montage with Mabel narrating Stan passed back into his head, you are, in the show language, being held. Pacifica parents, considered carefully, are one of the show's darker, quiet portraits, and the show, in its handling of them, is unusually clear about what it thinks of certain kinds of wealthy parenting. Preston and Priscilla Northwest, as introduced in the second season, are not just snobs. They are, on a careful watch, a study in long-term emotional cruelty. The bell, which they ring to summon Pacifica when they want her to behave a certain way, is the show's single most condensed image of the way the family operates. Pacifica, in flashback, is shown being trained by her parents the way you would train a dog, with a bell and a treat and a punishment, and the show on screen lets you see Pacifica wince when the bell rings. The way she breaks from her parents in Northwest Mansion mystery by opening the door to the lower-class townspeople her parents had excluded from a party is, in this light, not just an act of generosity. It is, in real terms, an act of self-extraction. Pacifica, by choosing the right thing in front of her parents, accepts that she will be, from that day forward, less their daughter. The show is, in its short handling of this, doing something that very few children's shows of its era were willing to do. It is showing a child making a moral choice that costs her family approval, and it is treating that choice as a kind of small heroism. Pacifica, by the end of the show, is no longer the rival. She is part of the alliance. And the cost of that move, in the show language, is not soft. The Northwest family, by the finale, has lost most of its wealth, and the show is quietly satisfied about it. The Gleeful family, on the other side of the social ladder, is the show's second portrait of a small-town family with a child positioned as a kind of weapon. Bud Gleeful, who runs a small car dealership, and his wife, present Gideon to the town as a psychic prodigy, profit from his ministry, and indulge his cruelty when it suits them. Gideon, in Season 1, is the family weapon. By Season 2, after Gideon is in prison for a stretch, the family is reduced to a much smaller, much sadder version of itself, and Gideon, on his eventual release, is shown in a kind of small redemption arc, helping the twins in the finale, in a way that, while it does not undo his earlier behavior, lets him be more than a child villain. The show argument here is more complicated than the Northwest argument. Pacifica is allowed a clean break from her parents. Gideon is allowed to revise his own behavior on his own terms without ever quite escaping the family pattern. The two arcs together are the show's willingness to think carefully about how children of bad parents end up where they end up, and what kind of repair, if any, is available to them. Robbie, Wendy's ex-boyfriend, is, in the smaller cast, a study of teenage masculinity that the show handles with surprising tenderness. He is, in Season 1, a comic antagonist, a sulking, hoodied, eyeliner-wearing teenager who is, in form, a kind of caricature of a small-town goth. The show, in Season 2, refuses to let him be only that. There is an episode in which Dipper accidentally gets Robbie back together with Tambry, his new girlfriend, and the show lets you see Robbie, in private, in a moment of grief he tries to hide. The show, in subsequent episodes, lets Robbie develop a kind of pragmatic friendship with Dipper, and although the friendship is never the center of an episode, the show keeps him present in the cast in a way that respects him as a real person. He fights in the finale. He cries at the wedding scene of one of the side characters. He is allowed to be a small, slightly broken, occasionally generous teenager, and the show, by giving him this much room, is again making an argument about who counts as a character worth seeing. Robbie is, in the show ecosystem, a person, and the show insists on this in small ways across both seasons. Almost no one in Gravity Falls is a prop. Almost everyone, on a close watch, gets a moment of interiority. This is one of the reasons the show, on rewatch, feels enormous despite being only 40 episodes. The town is full. The town is busy. The town is, on every street, a population of small, careful portraits. Beyond the main episodes, the show also released a series of shorts, small 1 to 3 minute pieces that aired between full episodes and which fans have long argued belong as part of the main canon. The shorts include Mabel Guide to Life, in which Mabel offers her own commentary on fashion, dating, art, and other small life topics, and Dipper Guide to the Unexplained, in which Dipper offers small Monster of the Week pieces in the journal voice, and Fixin' It with Suze, in which Suze repairs household appliances in his own gentle, slightly haunted style. The shorts are, on the surface, supplementary marketing material. On a careful watch, they are also part of the show world building. Mabel Guide to Life shorts contain small character beats that feed into the main episodes. Dipper Guide to the Unexplained contains creature details that the show then uses episodes later as setups for monster encounters. The shorts are, in their own way, part of the Cipher layer with their own credit sequences and their own hidden messages. The fans, in collecting these shorts and decoding them alongside the main episodes, treat them as part of the unified text. Hirsch, in interviews, has treated them similarly. The show, in its bonus content, behaves like a single integrated piece of work, rather than a main episode surrounded by promotional padding, and that integration is part of why the show has retained its critical reputation. The reception of Gravity Falls, considered as a piece of children animation, was unusually warm during its run, and has, since then, grown into something closer to canonical status in the medium. The show was praised by critics on its initial release for its visual design, its writing, its willingness to engage with serialized storytelling on a network that historically preferred episodic formats, and its respect for its audience. It won industry awards and was nominated for many more, including multiple Annie Awards, and Hirsch was, in the years immediately following the finale, a sought-after voice in discussions of where animated storytelling could go in a streaming era. The show has since then been treated by a generation of new animators as an influence, with creators in subsequent shows pointing to Gravity Falls as a piece of work that demonstrated children animation could carry adult emotional weight without sacrificing its core audience. The cultural footprint of the show is, in a way, larger than its episode count would suggest. 40 episodes is, by modern animated streaming standards, a short series. Gravity Falls, on the strength of those 40 episodes, has remained in conversation for over a decade, with new fans discovering it on streaming platforms and finding, in its rewatchability and its cipher layer, a piece of work that grows on each return. Theories about the show deeper meaning often gather around the question of what Gravity Falls is actually about, and the answers fans give are usually variations on a single theme, which is that the show is, at its core, about time. The summer is a fixed quantity. The children have a finite number of days in the town. The summer is going to end whether the twins want it to or not. Every episode is, in a small way, a piece of that summer being spent, and the show is constantly drawing attention to the calendar in the kitchen, to the way the light changes, to the slow approach of the end of August. Time is what Bill is offering Mabel in the rift scene. Time is what Ford takes from Stan when he disappears into the portal. Time is what Mabel and Dipper are negotiating with each other when they argue about the apprenticeship. Time is what the journals are trying to record before the author runs out of it. Time, in this show, is the resource, more than journal pages or memories or magic. And the way the show ends, on the back of a bus with the twins going home, is, in this reading, the show argument that the only honest response to the passing of time is to accept it, to let the summer end, to let childhood close, and to take with you, on the bus, only the things and people who can come too. The show, on this argument, is a long meditation on the same thing every summer movie has always been about, which is that the days end. The argument, in Gravity Falls, is that the days are still worth having, even though they end. There is a theory, more philosophical than the others, that the show is also a meditation on the act of making a children's show. Hirsch, in interviews, has spoken about the way his childhood, his own twin sister, and his own relationship with his grandfather shaped the writing of the show. The show, on this argument, is a piece of personal art smuggled inside a Disney property, and the author in this reading is not just a character in the show. The author is, in some sense, every animator who tries to put a piece of themselves into a piece of work for children. The journals, on this argument, are a metaphor for the show itself, a careful catalog of strange things that the writer hopes a child will, eventually, find and read. Dipper, in this reading, is, in part, the show ideal audience. A curious child who picks up a strange book in the woods and gives the contents the seriousness they deserve. The show, in this reading, is, in part, a love letter from the people who made it to the people who are eventually going to find it. This reading is not provable. It is also, on a careful watch, hard to argue with. Gravity Falls is, in every frame, the work of people who cared about it. It shows. And the care, like the cipher layer, rewards the people who watch closely. Looking at the show one more time, in this longer view, the structural elegance becomes more visible. The show begins with a child finding a book in a tree. The show ends with a child getting on a bus, having put the book down. The show begins with Stan running a tourist trap in secret. The show ends with Stan handing the trap to a worthier man and going to sea with his brother. The show begins with Ford lost in a portal nobody knows is there. The show ends with Ford reconciled with the brother he wronged and ready to spend his last years in his company. The show begins with Mabel making crafts in an attic. The show ends with Mabel having held her family together with the same crafts. The show begins with Bill watching from somewhere outside the visible frame. The show ends with Bill, in stone, in a forest, still watching, In a way, the show refuses to fully confirm or deny. Every thread the show set up, it ties off. Every character it bothered to develop, it pays off. Every cipher in the credits, when decoded, contains a piece of information that, when assembled, gives you a second, more textured account of what the show was doing. There is no piece of the show that does not point to other pieces of the show. There is no piece of the show that does not, on a long enough look, reveal something else. The final theory worth raising in this long account is the one fans return to most often on anniversaries. And that is the theory that Gravity Falls is, in part, a story about the people who made it and the people who watched it. And that the bond between the twins is, in part, a model for the bond between the show and its audience. The show, by ending when it did, refused the temptation to keep going past its own peak. The show, by the cipher layer, treated its audience as collaborators. The show, by the cipher hunt, treated its audience as participants. The show, by the Book of Bill, kept the audience in conversation years after the credits. The whole project, considered as one piece of work, has the texture of an extended love letter between the creators and the viewers, with each side leaving small signs for the other in the margins. Gravity Falls is, in this reading, not just a story about a brother and a sister and a great uncle and a demon. Gravity Falls is also a small public declaration, by the people who made it, that the people who watch carefully deserve a story that watches them back. That is rare in any medium. It is especially rare in children animation. And it is one of the reasons the show, after a decade, still has the grip on its audience that it does. When you look at where Gravity Falls now sits in the larger conversation about animated television, the picture becomes clearer with each passing year. Shows that came after it have borrowed its mystery box structure, its serialized emotional weight, its willingness to put real fear and real grief into a format aimed at children. Animators have spoken about the show in interviews as a piece of work that gave them permission to ask their networks for serialized arcs, for darker tones, for villains who were genuinely frightening, for endings that were genuinely earned. Whether or not those subsequent shows would have existed without Gravity Falls is impossible to say, but the show is part of the conversation, and that is, in itself, an achievement that very few children animated series ever attain. Most children's shows are forgotten within 5 years of their finale. Gravity Falls is, almost 10 years on, still actively discussed, still being decoded, still being theorized about, and still being added to by its creator through additional books and bonus material. The show is, in this sense, alive in a way that most of its contemporaries are not. The audience, by refusing to put it down, has kept it open. There are a handful of smaller threads that fans often return to in long discussions of the show, and they are worth a final pass before we close. The character of Stan, on the question of whether he is technically a Pines at all, or whether his identity at some point became something else, is one such thread. The show, in passing, makes clear that Stan was born Stanley Pines, that he lived as Stanley Pines until the night of the portal accident, and that from that night forward he lived under his brother name, on his brother documents, with his brother identity in legal use. The fans have argued, sometimes seriously, that the man we have come to love is, in a real sense, both brothers and neither, that he carries the affection of one and the paper trail of the other, and that the long period in which he was, on every document, Stanford Pines made him into a hybrid figure who, by the end, has earned the right to be either name. The show, in its final episodes, returns him to Stanley. The driver license joke, the moment when he opens his wallet, the offhand line that confirms his real name for the audience, are all played as comedy. Underneath the comedy, the show is making a small statement. The name you are called by, the show is saying, is partly the name you have earned. The man who lived for 30 years as Stanford, by the time he becomes Stanley again, has earned both. The theory about whether the twins' parents knew anything about what their grand-uncles were involved in is another thread fans return to. The show suggests, in passing, that the parents do not know. The arrangement to send the twins to Gravity Falls for the summer is presented as an ordinary, slightly inconvenient family decision, not a deliberate placement. The parents, in the few brief glimpses you get of them, are framed as a slightly tired suburban couple in Piedmont, who were happy to have the twins out of the house for a few weeks. The show does not let them be more than that. Some fan theories try to argue that the parents must have known, that the family secret could not have been kept entirely from them, that the choice to send the twins specifically to Stan is in some sense a deliberate one. The show does not support these theories with evidence. The show, in fact, seems comfortable with the idea that the parents were oblivious, and that the twins, by accident, walked into a piece of family history nobody had told them about. This is, on reflection, one of the show's kinder choices, because it allows the twins to discover their family on their own terms, without the burden of inherited expectation. They love Stan because they chose to love him, not because they were told to. The question of whether Ford ever fully recovers from his time in the multiverse is, in the show language, never quite answered. The finale shows him at peace with his brother. The finale shows him planning a long, slow, gentle voyage on a boat with the man he wronged. The finale does not show him, in any clear sense, having fully reintegrated into ordinary life. He still seems, in the porch conversation, like a man on the edge of vigilance, who has spent so long expecting an enemy that the absence of one will take a long time to settle into. The brothers on the boat will take care of each other in the way old men do. They will sit on a deck. They will eat from the same pan. They will, in the show implied off-screen future, watch the same sunrise that they had been watching apart for 30 years. The show does not give you this. The show only points at it. And the implication, like much of the show implication, is that the work of healing is, by definition, not something a show can stage. It is something the characters keep doing after the credits roll, and that the fact of their being together is, in itself, the closest the show can come to showing it. The final piece, perhaps the most important piece of the show argument, is the way it treats the bond between the twins as a thing that survives the summer. Dipper and Mabel, on the bus home, are going back to their ordinary lives, but the show has spent 40 episodes making clear that their lives, as a unit, are stronger than the summer that just ended. The show is, on its largest argument, an essay in favor of love that does not require performance. Mabel does not need to convince Dipper that she loves him. Dipper does not need to convince Mabel. The love is, in the show language, a fact. It is the same fact at the beginning of the summer and the end of the summer. It is the same fact when one of them is being possessed by a demon and the other one is in the next room with puppets. It is the same fact when one of them is hiding in a bubble of avoidance and the other one is breaking in to find them. The show, by the end, has used this fact as its primary structural support. Almost every climax in the show, every choice that closes an arc, traces back to one twin choosing the other. The show argument, in its quietest, most unstated form, is that this kind of love is available to ordinary people, that it does not require demons or portals or summer towns in Oregon, that it is, in fact, the kind of thing siblings and friends and partners do for each other every day, often without notice. The show is, in this sense, not just a story about a strange town. The show is, in this sense, a small instruction manual, in the disguise of a children animated series, on how to love the people in your life. And the manual, by the end of the bus ride, has been quietly handed to you. In closing this account, it is worth noting one more piece of the show that the analysis cannot quite reach, which is the texture of what it feels like to watch it. The show has a particular pace, a particular palette, a particular way of letting a slightly faded summer light hang over a scene, and the sum of those choices produces an emotional register that no analysis can fully convey. The first episode opens on a forest in dusk. The last episode closes on a bus pulling away in afternoon. In between, the light shifts through the long days of summer, through morning fog and afternoon haze and the gold of late August. The show is, in its color palette, a kind of remembered season, the kind of summer the brain edits into a slightly nostalgic version of itself after the season is over. Watching the show is, in part, a kind of induced nostalgia, a reminder of summers you have already had or summers you wish you had. And the show, in choosing this register, is making a final small argument about what it is doing. The show is, in form, a children animated comedy. The show is, in feeling, a memory of a summer you may not, strictly, have had. The show, by being both at once, becomes, for many of the people who love it, a piece of work that is permanent in the way only certain pieces of childhood are permanent. The town, the twins, the man in the fez, the man in the long coat, the demon in the triangle, the journals, the woods, the mystery shack at the end of a forest road, the bus rolling out under the trees. If you have followed this far, you have walked through the whole of the show, from a 12-year-old boy finding a leather book in a tree to a man on a porch losing his mind for the sake of his family. With a long meditation in the middle on the friends and townspeople and creatures the show chose to make real. You have walked through the journals, through the ciphers, through the cipher hunt, through the prophecy of the axolotl, through the book of Bill, through the theories about the muse and the constellation and the multi-dimensional pines. You have listened to the show as a piece of work, argue its own case for what stories are for. And if you are still here, in whatever room you are listening in, the show in its own way has done one more piece of its job. It has accompanied you out of one part of an evening into a deeper part, in the same way it once accompanied a generation of children out of one part of an afternoon into a deeper one. Gravity Falls on a Long View is a show that knows how to sit with you. Tonight, on this channel, we have tried to sit with it back. There is, in the long quiet of a show like Gravity Falls, the same thing that there is in the long quiet of any story we keep coming back to, which is the feeling that the world inside the show has continued to exist after the credits, that somewhere the twins are still on the bus, that somewhere Stan and Ford are still on the boat, that somewhere Seuss is still in the shack, that somewhere McGucket is still talking to his son in a small bright house, that somewhere the trees are still doing what trees do, and that somewhere, in the woods, the statue still stands with its hand outstretched. Whether or not the entity inside the statue is still waiting is a question the show is content to leave open. And tonight, with the lights low and the rest of the evening ahead of you, the open question feels, in its way, like the show's last small gift. There are stories that close, and there are stories that just slow down, and Gravity Falls in its